Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 23rd Educational Affairs Committee meeting. We will start with a roll call, and I will just ask people, I will just call names as I also see them on my screen. Mr. Schultz.
Present.
Mr. Burdell Williams.
Present.
Ms. Haywood.
Present.
Ms. Henry.
Present.
Mr. Cohen.
Present.
Mr. Fishbein.
Present.
And Mr. Pender.
Present.
Thank you. And Mr. England was not able to join us this evening. Next, I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the October 19th, 2021 Educational Affairs Committee meeting.
So moved. Joel
Thank you, Mr.
Fishbein.
Fishbein. Thank you. Second?
Second, Julie Haywood.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood. And next, we will get to the meat of the meeting, which is going to be a presentation from our principals and Dr. Smith regarding benchmarking data from this school year and school improvement planning for this school year. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Smith.
Good evening, everyone. Is my screen visible?
It is.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Educational Affairs Committee meeting. It's Tuesday, November 23rd. And tonight's topic, well, before I get to the topic, we always take a minute to pause and look at our mission statement and our vision statement as a way to center us and to ground us and remind us that all of our work and all of our efforts that we put into the district should be reflective of these two. And so tonight's presentation is meant to give benchmark data that our students participated in the early fall. My apologies. One of my screens is like blocking the words, so I can't see. Okay. So these are the, we're going to present our benchmark assessment data. And just as a way of a review, benchmarks are an assessment device as well as a learning tool. They are not used primarily to be evaluative of teachers and of instructional staff, but as a means to see where our students are performing as they relate to the academic standards, and also to see what additional instruction they may need or additional support they may need. The benchmark data that you'll see this evening is baseline benchmark data. This benchmark data comes directly from our fall administration. It is the first assessment, first common assessment that all of our students in the district who participated took after a long break from benchmarking as a result of the pandemic. The goal of benchmarking is to identify student strengths and also areas that may require improvement to guide future instruction and to support student outcomes. And again, the information that will be shared tonight is baseline data. It is the data that the students started with. The CSD, we began benchmarking in the fall of 2016. Previously, we used the Admentum system, and then we moved to Linkit. And we are now at the classroom diagnostic tools, also known as the CDTs. In grades 1 through 2, they continue to use the Linkit system. They do not use, not the Linkit system, the Linkit benchmark. They do not use CDTs. And the rationale for that is that the CDTs mirror the testing environment, the testing setup that students will encounter when they take the PSSA exam and or the Keystone exams, which are in grades 3 through 12. The benefits of CDTs include, as I stated here, the system and formatting. They mirror our state summative assessments. So this won't be the first time our students see these exams. It will not be the first time when they take their state assessments. This system is also fully integrated into our SAS system. Our SAS system is our standards aligned system. where any of our instructional staff, teachers, principals, and central office staff can go to that PDE hosted site to make sure that any lessons, any mini lessons, any assignments, so on and so forth, are aligned to current state standards. The CDT is also free. It's available to the district at no cost. And because the CDT is diagnostic, it does allow teachers, it allows principals and administrators to dig deeper into data and to form flexible groups. What you see in front of you is a sample of a CDT report. This sample is not reflective of Cheltenham per se, but it is an opportunity to see exactly what the chart looks like when teachers receive a report, or when principals receive a report, or when any of our central office administrators receive reports. So as you can see in the right-hand corner, you see our scale score ranges. You see a section of blue, you see a section of green, you see a section of red. You also see that dotted dashed line going through the green section. And you also see numbers that are dots throughout the graph. And those numbers represent scores that students have received. So the scale score range for all grades and subjects is always 200 to 2,000 points. Whether you're in third grade, whether you're in eighth grade, that is always the scale. However, the range changes based on the exam. So in this case, if you have a scale score for red, for this sample, grade 3, red is 200 through 821, green is 821 through 984, and blue is 985 through 2000. Again, the scale itself does not change. It's always 200 to 2000, but what's red, what's green, what's blue does change based on the test. The targeted scale score is always the middle of the green, which is the average of the upper and lower green values. So that dotted line is the average of the upper and green low values. The cut score for the Linkit benchmarks were always changing depending on the time of the year that the test was given. So the fall cutoff score for third grade, for example, for green is 821. If the students take a third grade exam again in the spring, that scale score could, in theory, change. The top of the green represents the end of a course. So this is where students will fall at the end of a course. So anyone scoring in blue is scoring beyond their grade level. As of note, the CDT scores do not, the CDT colors do not correspond with PSSA. So with PSSA, blue means advanced. In this case, blue does not necessarily mean advanced. So even though the colors are similar, they do not correspond. So I wanted to make sure that I noted that. And while the state does not intend for CDT scores to be a predictor of PSSA or Keystone, historical data does suggest that students who do well in the green section, in the blue section, do tend to do better on the PSSA. So baseline benchmark data by school. And at this time, I'm going to turn things over to the principal of Cheltenham Elementary School, Mr. Nick Perez. And what I would like to point out before he starts is this notion of an N count. The N count equals the number of students tested. So prior to sharing their data, each principal is going to introduce you to the number of students that were tested and also the percentage that that number represents. So at this time, I'm going to put my mic on mute and allow Mr. Perez to present his data.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you, members of the board. I'm going to go into a little bit of my data and the scores that are reflective of the benchmarks that we had taken. In addition, I'll have an opportunity to talk with you about my plans moving forward, looking at this one piece of data that we've collected. So as far as the ranges, as you can see, across the board, in first grade, we have a number of students. We have 84 students total, and those were tested. Second and in second grade, we have 64 students in second grade. We have currently 4 classrooms of each first and second grade. In our third grade, we have 5 classrooms, and there's 79 students. And in our fourth grade, we do also have 5 classrooms, and we have a total of 82 students. So in looking at our data for Linkit, specifically in first grade, one of the things that we looked at and has been an area of focus for us is math. And I think in the slides coming up, when I talk a little bit specifically about what are some of the data points and root causes for first and for second grade, one of the things that I am looking at specifically is our math scores, and the fact that, again, like Dr. Smith stated, these are typical end of the year, or current grade level standards. So students that are coming in, we tend to look and see where they are. We use these benchmarks throughout the year to look at growth. However, we did see that compared to last year students coming in, although it's a different cohort, we have seen an increase of the amount of students in our bottom 2 quartiles. So for example, in reviewing some of the benchmark data for first and second, we had students that tested at least, we had a 13% more in the 4th quartile for our first grade coming in versus last year's Linkit scores. So that's something that we definitely have to take into account, being that our students this year in first grade are significantly, in the Linkit are significantly lower coming in than our students from last year. Obviously, we're looking at the pandemic as being one of the root causes to that, and moving forward, what we can do to support those students. Second grade, similar, as you can see there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that positive spike in our second grade literacy. But the same thing in our math, again, similar to first grade, we definitely want to target math in our second grade, really across the board, because you'll see this for third and fourth grade as well. So in our third grade, we do see some positives as far as where we are in our basic and advanced range. However, definitely we want to target those students in our basic range to really support them to get them over that hump in the next upcoming benchmarks. And similar with the CDTs, the format was much more rigorous for our students. It did take multiple days for third and fourth grade students to get familiar with the system and take the actual assessment. But I think as we go through the assessments and students get more familiar with it, they'll be a little bit more comfortable with taking the assessment. And hopefully that'll be reflective as we're able to take the next benchmark. We can kind of focus our interventions and look at growth. Fourth grade as well, math, as in the other grades, that's going to be our targeted area. So overall, the targets for first and second, obviously it's that 44% that we're looking at in the fourth quartile. I'm also noticing a higher percentage of students, obviously in the lowest quartile. So that to me, again, is related to the pandemic, created some gaps in our numeracy skills. When we dive deeper, we definitely see that numbers and operations is an area that we need to focus on when we go into our 3rd and 4th grade CDTs. That's reflective in the data that we're seeing. So that's something that we'll see a little bit more clear as we move to the mid-December CDTs and our benchmarks to target students for intervention. So in the area of math, we'll continue to focus on our homogeneous groupings, instructed and targeted areas as needed, provide accelerated opportunities for students, continue to use our win periods to support students in reteaching and intervention opportunities, and utilizing our electronic systems such as IXL to track students' progress. If in the area of ELA, I wanted to highlight the 2nd grade, and that is to me reflective of a team that, in spite of the pandemic, did an amazing job in their planning and preparation. I was looking at the scores from last year's Lincoln in 1st grade and seeing the progression throughout the school year, where they started at 32% proficiency advance. At the end of the year, there was 76% of the students were at proficiency or advanced. So coming in, looking at 2nd grade ELA, we're extremely positive about those students coming in. We credit, like I said, their planning and preparation, and that's something that we are going to move forward with, moving forward in supporting the 2nd grade team, in building on some of the successes, in consistency and use of the foundations, professional development as needed to support those teachers, as well as, targeting those students for acceleration. And for our 3rd grade, the last point, 48% of the students were in the lower 2 quartiles in the first CDT benchmark. So again, like I mentioned before, this is the first time our 3rd and our 4th graders have taken the CDTs. So although that is good information for us to target, we can delve into a little bit deeper what areas we need to focus on, specifically vocabulary acquisition and usage. In 3rd grade is an area that we need to target. We need to, for example, that is kind of determining the clarity of meaning of unknown and multiple meaning words or phrases that are seen in grade level text, and also demonstrating understanding of word relationships and nuances in word meaning. So that's that was the area that I think we need to target as a grade level. So those for me as a student, as the building principal, I'm working with teachers to determine what does that look like in their current curriculum. What are some pieces as far as common planning and common assessments that they can work on together, so they can see how students are progressing. In addition, what resources do they need to build student vocabulary acquisition and language usage, in addition to how can we support students who are having difficulty through tutoring, through additional supports, and also how are we utilizing things such as IXL to target and track student performance. So again, just keeping in mind in everything that we want to make sure that students are improving, but understanding that many more students this year are coming in with social emotional needs than ever before. So that'll continue to be on the forefront of anything that we do. However, knowing that we need to really support these students academically, but we also want to make sure that they feel safe and they have the skills to manage their emotions. And that I think comes across in some of the root causes and some of the things that you'll hear tonight, I'm sure, from other administrators as well. But we definitely see that we have our work cut out for us and what we need to do for our students. However, I'm confident that some of the targeted desired outcomes that we have are gonna bear fruit.
Principal Robinson.
Dr. Smith, before we get on to Glenside Elementary, and thank you, Mr. Perez, for that that part of your presentation and for that explanation actually behind those numbers too. That's actually very informative. I'm just jumping in here for a second, Dr. Smith, because I see that Mr. Schultz has his hand raised. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Ms. Lohman. And I swear I won't derail. This is a generic clarifying question around the terminology, which is used on all the presentations. I just want to make sure I understand the difference between the advanced, proficient, basic, below basic categorizations, which we use for some of the grades, and then the first, second, and third quartiles. And in particular with the quartiles, what are the quartile bins defined by? Are these Linkit scores that other districts are using, and we're it's all students in Montgomery County or something, and we are in different quartiles compared to all of them? Or are the quartile bins defined in terms of possible score ranges from 0 to the green line? Does my question make sense? I don't know who
Yes.
Mr. Perez, I don't know if I'm asking it of you or of Dr. Smith. I don't know who the right person to answer that would be.
Dr. Smith, I can answer from my understanding. The quartiles in the way that I referenced them in my chart were related to from the Linkit standpoint, because that is referred to as advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic. So the fourth quartile being the lowest quartile, being the below basic quartile. It's a little different when you're looking at it through the CDTs, obviously, because it's that green, blue range and the red range, which is, slightly different.
Thank you. And so on some of the slides, and this is consistent for all of the schools,
Yeah.
It looks like first grade uses the quartile terminology.
Correct.
And later grades use the advanced, proficient, basic, below basic terminology. Are they synonymous, or are they different? Yeah. Are they measuring the same concept in terms of there's a range that is below basic in first grade? It's just we happen to call it fourth quartile in first grade. Or is this sort of are these quartiles dependent on the scores of all the first graders in the Linkit system, is kind of what I'm trying to understand. Is this for a more like a percentile type of situation, or is it more, the fourth quartile cutoff is the same regardless of how students score? It's just students who scored 100, I don't know, I'm picking a number, are in the fourth quartile. 0 to 100 is fourth quartile, 100 to 300 is second, etc.
So just to jump in, the quartiles are normed by Linkit across all of their clients. Their clients, they do have Montgomery County clients, but all of their clients are not exclusively Montgomery County. So they are normed by Linkit across all of their clients. And to answer your second question, is Linkit doesn't correlate the first grade data with PSSA terminology.
Thank you very much. That you've clarified it all perfectly. And I will lower my hand. Thanks so much.
We'll turn it back to you, Dr. Smith, and Principal Robinson.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
We can, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be able to share about our benchmark data and also share some ways that Glenside team is planning to show progress this school year. So one thing to note, our in count, we had just about 100% of our scholars tested in all of the grade levels, with the exception of ELA in grade 2 and 3. And so this is a pretty good picture of sort of where we stood in the beginning of the year and where we'd like to be by the end of the year. One of the things that you will see that's pretty consistent, if we can go to the next slide, that you will see that's pretty consistent across the each of the grades. If you look here at grade 1, if you can go to grade 2, please. And then look at grade 3. Thank you. And then grade 4. Thank you. One of the things that you will notice is that, and this, let me just say this, back up a little bit too, that this is timely that we are having parent conferences the last 2 days. So it's really interesting to look at sort of where we were and then to see some of the progress that our scholars have already made, listening to the progress that the teachers shared with families. So what stood out to me in our baseline data on Linkit and CDT is that only approximately half of our scholars met or exceeded our grade level expectations, and that was across all of the grade levels, with the exception of 4th grade that showed a bit of a spike in their being proficient on their ELA. We also noted in terms of disaggregating the data that there was still some disparity in achievement, that sort of persists amongst our subgroups, which of the, we consider that to be the historically underperforming, our scholars with English language development, Black and Hispanic scholars, and students with IEPs. So another thing that I'm going to talk to you tonight about is sort of an achievement data point that's not represented in this baseline data, but is very relevant and salient to us, is the social emotional data and our need to really leverage forward an intentional focus on the well-being of our students and our teachers. I want to talk to you sort of about how do we get to this 50%, students meeting our expectations and 50% sort of at this basic or below basic or in the lower quartile. So a few root causes that I've identified and have discussed with my team. The first is time, right? Time was limited in the pandemic in the hybrid setting, and having more time now per class period, per win period has been absolutely amazing. Another root cause that continues to persist in terms of our data that we look really carefully about and have been thinking about a lot is curriculum coherence. So planning and collaboration was key in that hybrid setting. And so that's another thing that we want to really leverage forward. The fear is that we want to continue to think about a scope and sequence to carefully outline what we are teaching in each grade and when we are teaching it as it relates to the Common Core standards along with the common assessments. We don't want our teachers to fall into a pattern of a privatized practice, which we know isn't best practice. So we would like to, really make sure that we know what all of our first graders are learning, all of our second graders are learning, what did they learn the grade before, what do they need to learn in the grade above, and really make sure that there's that coherence there. It is our hope that we revisit that goal that we've had for a while. And I hope that also in terms of curriculum coherence, that we also revisit our writing framework. Glenside has taken a really intense look at our writing. It's in our schedule every day this year. And one of the things that we think about is the fact that when students are good writers, they're also good readers because they're reading something that someone wrote. And so when they learn the mechanic of writing and the writing workshop, they're also learning about, when they're talking about focus and content, They can then extrapolate that from the text that they're reading. What is the focus of this story? What is the main idea? Who are the characters? What are the structures? And what are they telling us? So as you read and write, we want to make sure that we have a very direct focus on that. Another area of opportunity and root cause that we see is sort of that culture proficiency, really understanding the needs of our scholars, developing that critical consciousness around the needs of all the subgroups, and being intensely focused on those subgroups is our goal. When we see that those subgroups scores are lifted, we'll see that our entire building scores will be lifted. So we've taken on, when you think about, so what are we going to do? We've taken on sort of a 3-tiered strategy at Glenside, where we're focusing on structure, strategy, and mindsets. As it relates to structure, what we've done is we've made sure that morning meeting is it happens every day, that we are training and supporting teachers and they have the resources for guided reading. We've put a 15 to 20 minute independent reading in the schedule. That is time for students to read their just right books that is on their level. It's not too hard, it's not too easy, but they have time and opportunity to practice those strategies that they're learning. We, again, as I mentioned, we put writing in there. We're looking closely at math routines. We are structured around our regular team meetings with all of our stakeholders, the use of active pedagogy to increase cognitive engagement, and really intense double dose intervention for strategic and intense needs of our tier 2 and tier 3 scholars, and also our gifted scholars as well, making sure that we're meeting those individual needs. One of the things that I'm doing as a school leader is making sure, as it relates to the subgroup of students with IEPs, we've developed a practice of reading those as a team, those evaluation reports before they are shared in a meeting, really being able to give feedback on and making sure that we agree as a team in terms of what the needs of the scholars, reading those IEPs in advance and giving feedback. Our annual meetings also start with a snapshot. It's really important to us to have a humanizing pedagogy at Glenside. And so really understanding what the students' goals are, that it's not just data that we're looking at, but we're looking at a real person with real goals, and we want to help them reach those goals. In terms of structure, looking at our MTSS system, right? Our multi-tiered system of support, having regular kid talk meetings, careful monitoring and documentation of those meetings. Academic and behavior, getting our SAP program together. We also have data walls that is shared school-wide, so everyone can see where our scholars are on their reading levels. And then making sure that we get more and more comfortable with our data by having, regular data meetings that are structured, where we talk about our students and we make agreements in terms of how we are servicing their needs. PBIS is also a really big piece of our plan to improve. We want to make sure that our PBIS team includes parents, it includes students. It is a stakeholder group to really make sure that we are attending to what the data is telling our areas of opportunities are. Right now, I can tell you it's recess and the bus. And so the way that we look at that data and target really specific resets and retooling to make sure that those areas improve. And I had an opportunity today or yesterday even to meet with our lunch and recess aides and just really do some training, much needed training to really make sure that those target areas, because everywhere else is beautiful, right? And so let's hone in onto those target areas. Strategy is also really important to us. This year, we started our small group intervention much sooner than in a typical year. I made sure that teachers became content experts. If they moved a grade or they moved a position, getting the training that they need was really important early on. Hoping to continue this year, we haven't started yet, but I'm hoping that we continue with our foundations PLC, where all of the first grade, second grade, kindergarten teachers are looking together as a team areas that are where our students are doing well in all the buildings, and then our areas of opportunity for students. I've also asked one of my reading specialists to, develop a building-based curriculum instruction committee to really continue, as I said before, to look at that staircase curriculum and see where we are in terms of scope and sequence. Math is an area, huge area, as you can see, that we need to continue to think about and improve. When we look deeply in the data, it's number sense and problem solving proficiency that we really want to focus on. And we've done that. We've sent 2 teachers to get some training that they've done, turnaround training with the school. And so really understanding those math routines through quick images and solve and share to increase our the number sense proficiency and problem solving. And again, we're really focused on professional development, modeling, and the data meetings to help inform that. All right, so we are, last area that I just want to mention in terms of our improvement plan include pandemic related stress. There continues to be, friends, a lot going on. Students and teachers are still figuring things out. There's stress, there's anxiety, there are absences, and there's trauma. And so we want to facilitate positive interaction, recognitions, and ensure safety of all of our students and all of our teachers. As the sole leader in the building, it is critical to keep building teacher capacity, counselor capacity, and this year remain flexible. It is my hope, bear with me, school board. It is my hope that one day we can sit with central office and K-4 principals and really look at our organizational structure at the K-4 level to see, with all the needs of our district and our K-4 building, do we have what we need to really sustain all of the programs and things that we'd like to do. Glenside, is projected to grow even more next year. And at our peak being at 477 students, we're looking at what does that mean with 1 administrator, 1 counselor, 10-month secretary. So these are all factors, when we talk about how do we get better and how do we make progress that I'd like us to continue to consider. As you can see, I tell my teachers and my families all the time that despite the challenges, though, we are trending in the right direction. We were before the pandemic. I have full confidence that we will in the future. And despite personal things that are going on every day, my teachers show up every day and they do amazing work. So ultimately, when we talk about KPIs, Glenside has a goal of 100% of our K-4 scholars demonstrating growth towards mastery of grade level English language arts, math content as measured by our foundations assessment, our next step running record assessments, our Linkit benchmark, our CDD benchmark, and our PSSA for 3rd and 4th graders by June of 2022. It is also our goal to see 100% of our scholars and teachers demonstrate increased sense of wellness, connection, and self-efficacy as measured on pre and post surveys. So that's where we are. Our theme this year is how are the children? We ask that question, and when we can answer the children are well, then we know that our building is well. Thank you for allowing me this time.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Principal Lytle. Actually, I'm going to jump in for 1 second before you start, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to actually thank Principal Robinson for that discussion and presentation, and for all of your thoughtful comments about what's going on at Glenside and where you would like to see the students going from here and the staff. Glenside is near and dear to my heart personally. So I particularly appreciate those comments, but I thank you for that. I see that actually Ms. Henry has her hand up.
Thank you, Ms. Lohman. I was trying to get it up before we moved over to Myers and I couldn't slide my mouse around quick enough. Can we go back? There was maybe 2 slides towards the end of Ms. Robinson's presentation, there was in that the continuum of proficiency, there was a bubble. What does that mean? Can you go back again? And I didn't want to lose that. Go back again. There it is. What does that mean in the scoring levels?
The bubble are the scholars that just with a little bit more of a push, they're not basic, they're not proficient, but usually when we're focusing, when we focus our tutoring and just our win, they're the ones that if taken the assessment today would probably be somewhere about proficient. So you really want to focus on that bubble group. They're not solidly at the grade level expectations, but they're not far behind.
Okay, and just one more question so I can understand this as the other schools are going. What's the difference? So when you have below basic, that's clear. You have basic and proficient. What's happening with scholars in there? How do you define it? What's the differentiator there between basic and proficient?
It really depends on, as Dr. Smith shared earlier, that cut score of what would be considered, at grade level at that particular time. For Linkit, they pretty much take the same exam each benchmark, but the cut score changes. And so they're expected to know more as we move further on in the year. And so how they score in terms of proficient or basic will be determined with, the growth that they make, more content that they know. So we typically will see the more that's covered, the better students will do. But the assessment is basically when they take it in the September is what we expect students to know by the end of the year. And so how students perform is, indicating of, do they really have it already? Or what are some areas of opportunity for them? So it's the same exact test, but the cut score changes to determine whether they're at grade level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Robinson and Ms. Henry for those questions. Because I actually had a similar question or maybe comment was that benchmarking is testing students on, especially in the initial benchmarking, is testing students on subject matter they have not yet necessarily been instructed on.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were sort of all on the same page about that. And then the CDT, my understanding is that is correlated to the PSSA and standards in the way the PSSA scores things. Is that correct?
It's not a predictor of how they would do on the PSSA, as Dr.
Okay.
said earlier.
Okay, but it uses the same advanced, proficient, the same standards, linked to the same standards.
Yeah, PA standards is based on the PA standards.
Okay. So the CDT though, I guess we can sort of learn more potentially from the CDT on the data that we get from the CDT. I'm just sort of trying to understand, since we switched from Edmentum to Linkit to CDT, sort of what the CDT gives us. And I think you had already sort of said this already, Dr. Smith, so I apologize, but what the CDT gives us that the other types of benchmark assessments do not.
So the CDT is aligned to the Common Core standards, and it gives you a snapshot of where students are. And it drills down to the individual student level where our educators or our teachers can determine areas of strength and then areas of deficiencies so that they can then take that data and have a clear snapshot of where they need to reteach, accelerate, or enrich based on those data results. And that should be a continuous improvement cycle as we do data review, which is going to be our work putting that together. Right now, just understand that this is initial baseline snapshot of where we currently stand. So we can go deeper into some of the other specifics around our next steps. We have that at a latter point in the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven, for that explanation. That was very, very helpful. And I know that we have a lot to get to. I apologize.
May I add something as well about the CDTs?
Sure.
So it's not the same test every time since it's adaptive. So adaptive meaning it kind of grows with the student. And if you want me to, I can go back to that earlier slide. Can you see that? Okay. And
Yeah.
so it's aligned to all the eligible content areas at the various grade levels, and it goes where the students are versus Link It, which is limited to a predetermined bank of questions. So Link It kind of said, here are the questions for third grade, have at it. CDT basically says, here are the questions for third grade, and based on as the students continue to test, it adapts and it goes into a different direction. So CDTs are more aligned to our PA core standards.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. That is also very helpful to understand the difference between those. Ms. Haywood, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Sloman. I want to just ask a question to maybe clarify just what was said. So Dr. Smith, you said that the CDTs are aligned with the PA course standards and are summative, meaning that, as the students go through the school year, the questions are harder, they're probably more complex, and you can drill down per student to see, where they are and what other support they may need. But are we expecting by the third quarter of the year to generally have a better understanding of what we would anticipate the outcomes on PSSAs would be? If they're aligned to the core standard, as are the PSSAs, I'm confused in terms of how that could not help, maybe not predict, but help at least inform where the students would be when they take the PSSAs.
So two things, it's not summative, it's adaptive. So just to clarify that point. And to your second point, the CDTs, while it's not, the state doesn't intend for it to be a predictor. They make that very clear. The CDTs come from the state. However, because of the alignment to the core standards and because of its framework and structure that is similar to the test, you can reasonably make those assumptions, but the state, by virtue of their position with the CDTs versus PSSAs, they are not exclusively saying, yes, this is a predictor. However, data shows that students who do well on the CDTs do well on PSSA, but the state will not take that step to say it is a predictor.
And so we're looking throughout the school year with the benchmarks to look at growth, correct?
Correct. Growth by standards, yes.
Right. And so growth by standards, I think collectively would give you a snapshot on whether 50% of the class, third grade class at whatever elementary school was comprehending whatever standards they were expected to comprehend, during the school year. So it does provide you a little bit of a snapshot, right? As you go along throughout the school year by student, as well as aggregate level, correct?
I would agree. Yes, ma'am. There's a correlation.
Okay. I have some other questions, but I'm going to hold those until later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith and Dr. Scriven, for those explanations. That's helpful. And sorry, Principal Lytle, for kind of stepping in here.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm I'm excited to talk about the great things that are happening at Myers. I'll simply start off by talking about our data and our root causes, and we will get to some of our priorities and our desired outcomes and approaches as we continue in the presentation. I'm very optimistic that I will get to the end of an in-person school year for the first time in my tenure as principal. Similar to many of my colleagues, this baseline data, which is giving us just an initial glimpse of how students are performing, shows quite a bit of opportunity and is ripe for growth at Myers. You'll see by our end count, we are a 306 student strong school full of energy, life, and happiness. You'll see that we have our 3 kindergarten classrooms, which are not reflected here. We have 3 first grade classrooms consisting of between 45 and 47 students. Second grade has 4 classrooms of 56, third grade, 4 classrooms of 58, and then we have our 3 classrooms of 4th graders, totaling approximately 55 wonderful students. We had a very high participation rate as it relates to engagement in our baseline assessments, but I'll particularly talk about the baseline data on our Linked assessment, which was issued in math and reading to our 1st and 2nd graders, and the CBT data, which was issued to our 3rd and 4th grade students for math and for reading as well. You can go to the next slide. As many of my colleagues have shared, the baseline data for each of our 4 grades, and I'll continue to express it as an opportunity for us to support our students. As we look at the data for our 1st graders in ELA and math on the Linked assessment, which is, as everyone has stated, a standardized assessment, measuring students' performance on all of the grade level standards that they are supposed to know by the end of the school year. We see a significant portion of our students performing in the lower quartiles, specifically in math. We are able to look deeper in that data and correlate that to specific skills and specific standards. And we do notice among all of our students in 1st grade, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, a significant portion of our students that are scoring in the 4th quartile or that are scoring in the below basic range are comprised of some of our African-American students, which is reflective of the overall achievement gap that we as a collective group in the district are working very vehemently to address. As we look at the ELA performance, we'll see that we do have 23% performing in the 1st quartile, but the percentages can sometimes be misleading. If we look at them as numbers of students, that 23 or that 31, it might be representative of 23% of that population of 55. So there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of growth to be had. The same can be said for the numbers in the lower quartiles. So when we look at this data, yes, we use this data to drill down to the standards for math for 1st grade and for ELA, but the data shows a comparable area of opportunity as it has at Cheltenham and at Glenside for our students in 1st grade as relates to ELA and math. If we'll go to the next slide for 2nd grade. Our 2nd graders are showing the biggest need or the greatest need again, and we can see it in math, which is a common thread that we are really excited about the things that we're planning and we're implementing in order to address that area of identified need, which we'll discuss later. But you'll see from the data that is present for 2nd grade in ELA and math that we have a greater proportion of students scoring in that basic and in math, that below basic area. And once again, as we look at our demographics, we see that we have work to do as it relates to supporting and encouraging our students of color as it relates to what they need as it relates to performing better on these assessments and gaining the needed skills in order to perform at grade level standards. If we continue to the third grade, and we've talked extensively about the CDT assessment and its parallels to, when I think of the CDT, I think of standards. When I think of any assessment, I think of standards. Standards are the roadmap for teachers, which they break into objectives. And those objectives are all supposed to work together to circle back to all of the skills and strategies that are needed in order to be successful as we try to show mastery of those standards. So when I look at the CDT, I look at the big silos of students that are performing at the proficient level in ELA, but once again, we see a greater struggle in math. We take those standards in math and we need to be able to drill down, as Dr. Scriven stated, utilizing that data to identify those standards that are in the greatest need of support. But those standards must are reflecting that there are some prerequisite skills that need to be taught, which I will talk about in a moment, and really give us the direction that we need to go in order to raise our scores. And comparably on the as relates to fourth grade, if we can change to the next slide, we see a parallel with students faring significantly better in ELA as opposed to math, which really mirrors some of the historical data at Myers and at the elementary schools in the district from what I've studied in my tenure. I want to talk briefly about some of the root causes of the data, which we have already seen a trend as relates to the three elementary schools, including myself, that have presented. I think when we talk about the impact of the pandemic, we talk about it in a large form, and we talk about it holistically, and we think about the physical displacement of students from being in school. But we are finding, and I am finding, that as we start to talk about some of the root causes and we start to examine the data that we see on these assessments and the data that we have from engaging with the wonderful children each and every day who cross our doorsteps, that the impact of the pandemic is reflective on many levels. There is no division in a school between climate and academics. They are one and the same, and there should be no gap. But we're seeing that the impact of the pandemic crossed all barriers, crossed all avenues, and has impacted the children in different areas as it relates to maybe their attention span, maybe their acclimation to being in large group settings, maybe their ability to sit for longer periods of time, their ability to be patient, their ability to take redirection, their ability to operate on receive feedback, their ability to make friends, engage with their peers, all of these things working in harmony as we talk about the impact of the pandemic. And those are mostly things that relate to socialization and the social emotional well-being of the children. Those things do translate to the academic progress or the areas of needed growth that we hope to address. And we're addressing them, and we'll talk about that later. But those are some of the root causes that we are finding. We're also finding that children are showing their needs on various timetables. I think that there was an initial idea that the children would all come back and that we would see all of the areas of needed support initially. But we're finding that children are telling us and showing us their needs. As the school year progresses, those needs change, and we are able we must be able to identify, provide resources, support, encouragement, and a pathway forward for those students to continue to be successful and to grow, which we'll talk about a little later. So when I say that one of the root causes of the data that we're seeing is the pandemic, I'm hoping that we're all able to capture the vast myriad of things that encompasses that might not initially be on our mind as we think of the impact of the pandemic on teaching and learning in schools. Secondly, one of the things that I I have noticed as a root cause, specifically at Myers, is the need for some streamlining of instructional practices. I always speak of Myers teachers with the highest regard, the best teachers that I've had the privilege of working with. But as we talk about root causes, and I don't want to use the word cause, I want to say one of the tools that we are utilizing and that we know we can address as we continue in my tenure as principal is to make sure that we are streamlining our instructional approach to focus on student engagement and a culture of learning. Those are two areas that we can that we are very intentional about being at the root for some of the data. And if we look at those two things, engagement, and we look at a culture of learning, we can relate them back to our first point of the pandemic. It's very hard to establish a culture of learning as you have students that are not in the school building to create engaging learning tasks. So as we are looking at some of these root causes, we've talked about the social and emotional side, and we start to look at the academic side as it relates to engagement and a culture of learning, instilling a belief within students for what they can achieve and what they can accomplish. As the teacher goes to my last point of a root problem or a root cause, that's streamlining. What is teaching supposed to look like? Who does the heavy lifting during the lesson? And we found that as we continue to grow at Myers, one of the root causes through teacher observation is the opportunity for teacher coaching as it relates to creating opportunities for teachers to support one another, to collaborate with one another, to streamline what it is that they are accomplishing and how they're going about delivering instruction. So I will just talk about it in that silo of how we can deliver instruction in a manner that is positive, and how we can support students as they transition back from the pandemic. Later in the presentation, I'll go into the specifics as it relates to what systems and structures we have put in place as it relates to supporting students academically, teachers in the delivery of instruction, and establishing a culture that is rich in student care and rapport, as well as encouragement and resources for our students.
We have a technical issue that we need to deal with. I need someone who is able to.
Jenny, are you the host?
I'm not the host.
All right, so whoever's in the Zoom room needs to kick Carlos out of the meeting and disable chat.
I will do that right now.
Thank you. So I see that he has been removed from the meeting. I don't think there's any way for us to remove his comments out of the chat box, though, unfortunately.
There is not.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, Principal Lytle.
I think it's on you. I think Principal Lytle had completed that portion of
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you. Did any board members have any questions before we go on? I don't see anything. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Principal Lytle, for that presentation. Part of your presentation is very helpful. Dr. Thomas, I guess we're on to the next next school.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to go ahead and get started since I see my information on the screen. I'm Crystal Clark, and I'm the proud principal of Winco Elementary School. And so as I begin, on the screen, you will see my first, second, third, and fourth grade students. And as you see from this slide, the majority of our students did take the benchmark assessments. When you look at the lower numbers in third grade, that is because instead of having 4 third grade classes, this year we have 3 third grade classes. And so in all the other grade levels, there are 4. And so again, I would say, of course, first grade is 100%. They are my overachievers. But in the other grade levels, we do have the majority of our students in the high 90 percentiles who did take those assessments. So next slide, please. So when we look at first grade, basically, as with all of our students, these benchmarks were new, and this was the first time that those students who had history and experience with taking assessments had taken the CDTs. And so for our first graders, this was really a first. Not only was it an opportunity for them to take an assessment, but it was the first time that they had all even been together in that type of environment taking an assessment. So I was actually rather surprised in some of the scores when we actually did some of our own preliminary assessments early on in the school year. We were quite concerned with our first grade students and where they were falling. And so these scores just show an indication of where we still continue to have work to do. Next slide. So our second grade students, and so, and even though it's been discussed already that that these benchmarks are not necessarily a predictor, but they often indicate how well students will do throughout time. And so when I look at these and I look at where our second graders are scoring, I will just say that traditionally, looking at my trend data over the last 5 years, our ELA has been something that we have been proud of, that our students have tended to score fairly high in ELA, where it has been in our math curriculum throughout the grades that we can continue to show inconsistency. And so, and just looking at this, students already scoring in a proficient or advanced range, according to this indicator, it's already at more than half of the students in the grade for ELA. And so when I look at this, I'm looking at the areas, it's pretty predictable from what some of the information that we saw in past indicators that we've given of where our students will fall. Again, ELA has been something that we've been able to do pretty well in, but we continue to have inconsistency, as you can see in those scores with our mathematics. Next slide, please. Our third grade as well. Again, not evaluating as a predictor, but there are no below basic students when you look at our ELA scores so far in our in third grade. And we do have more than half the students are already in a proficient or advanced range as it related to ELA. So again, we think that we're headed in the right direction as it relates to ELA with some of the measures that we've been putting in place over the last several years. However, we do understand that inconsistency has been the norm as it relates to working with our students during COVID. And so where we continue to show strides in some of the work that we've put in, we still continue to think of ways to kind of see the same level of increase in success in our mathematics that we have seen in our ELA. Next slide, please. Pretty much the same message. Our math really needing work. And if you look at our 4th grade ELA, again, more than half of the students, according to this, I believe it's 74%, are already in that proficient or advanced range. And again, we know that is not a true predictor, but it does actually give us information. As we know, we use our data to inform our instruction. And so it really gives some position points for our staff members as we're continuing to work with students in areas of needed growth and support. And so currently we are continuing to target our bubble students. I know, Ms. Henry, you asked earlier what the bubble was. And so we have been targeting our bubble students, those students that are in between that basic and proficient area, and those students that are between proficient and advanced. Those students are the students that historically we've been able to push to the area of proficiency, or even in the advanced ranges most easily. We find that those students just need a level of understanding, whether it is understanding the question, giving them additional supports as it relates to the vocabulary of the assessments, in addition to just some basic facts and ongoing review of learned concepts. So I mean, I'm really pleased that you've given us the opportunity to kind of just share who we are and what we've done, because I think sometimes there is maybe a one-sided look. Maybe you don't always hear or get to see what's happening from our point of view. And, you know, I consider that the illusion of a single story. And so I will say that this year, you know, many of you, I've had the pleasure of being the principal of some of your children. And this is my 18th year as the principal of Wyncote. I will say that this year, the anxiety that I see my teachers have, in addition to students, the pulls of the demand of what's happening in the building have just been none like I've ever seen before. And, you know, I often call this time in history, I refer to it to my staff as a time of rediscovery. You know, we've done some different things to try to meet where we are this year. And I think that, you know, Wyncote has built a culture of, I call it collaboration, innovation, and true engagement. And so with all of that, this year, I kind of had to put that to the side when we first got back to school and realized that our kids were not ready for the drill and kill to get started. They needed to build relationships with us. They needed to understand that school was not a scary place, and that it was a place that they could trust and they could feel comfortable, because without them coming and feeling a level of comfort and feeling extreme anxiety, they weren't learning anything. And not only do I feel that we are trying to calm students, we are also dealing with a heightened level of anxiety with parents. And so, you know, this is something that we haven't all, I guess, necessarily had the training and the tools in our own toolkit to deal with some of the things that are happening for many of us for the first time. And so one of the other things that I noticed in looking at my data is we talk about an achievement gap. In the past, we've also have a gender gap at Wyncote, where I do notice that regardless of race, that my female students are tending to do much better than my males. And that's an anomaly. I'm not sure why. We have put some activities and programs in place, like our boys book club and some other things that we've done throughout the years. I do attribute some of that to the increase in some of our ELA scores. But kind of looking at where we are and moving forward with root causes of some of our areas of concern, I would say that I do believe that we need additional supports for not only our teachers, but for ourselves in sharpening our own toolkit. Again, everyone keeps talking about how this year is different, and I am here to tell you that it is different. And it's hard to put your finger on just one thing that is different about it, but it just feels very different than it has in the past. And I would say that our teachers need an opportunity to collaborate, to meet and to grow and to learn with one another. Not only have we learned how to educate students differently, we've used different resources along the way. I think teachers haven't necessarily had a lot of time to really absorb and to delve in and truly understand some of all the resources that we're kind of giving them. I think having an opportunity to meet and grow across school and teams would give them more opportunities to kind of learn from each other, kind of when you kind of are developing a master class, but amongst your own colleagues. If there's something that's going well within one school, we should share it and we should learn from it. I mean, so often we're in our own schools dealing with our own issues, and our teachers don't really have an opportunity to share and grow with one another. I think that is something that would be looked upon favorably with our teaching staff, especially since many of our resources continue to be pretty new to them. And I think that would help us in utilizing many of our resources with fidelity, instead of just taking pieces out of it that kind of meet a particular topic or theme at a time.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, for that, for all of that information and for that discussion about what's really happening going on behind the data. That's extremely helpful. Dr. Scriven, I see your hand went up first, and then Ms. Henry.
So real quick, I just want to take an opportunity, especially for the K through 4 schools, to just frame conceptually what everyone is dealing with. When you look at what we've encountered around the pandemic, in terms of the last normal school year, a kindergartner has never had a normal school year. A grade 1 student has never had a normal school year. A grade 2 has never had a normal school year. The last normal school year for a grade 3 student was kindergarten. The last normal school year for grade 4 was grade 1. So when you look at it through that context, it frames the challenges that so many of the principals have alluded to with the root cause in terms of some of the pieces they're facing from a social, emotional, their attempts to engage, and really the importance of establishing relationships. So I just wanted to put that out there. And additionally, you heard Mr. Lytle state that this would be his first year. I believe he started in 2019, 2020. This will be his first normal school year. And same for Brian Wallace at EP. So just to give some context, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. I appreciate all of that context as well. That's all very true. We sort of tend to lose track of time as this pandemic goes on. So giving us, sort of grounding us in sort of where we all started where we all were when this started is very helpful. Ms. Henry, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to acknowledge the work that all of the principals are doing, and I know we have to hear from a few more But I can't even imagine, what you all are, what you really have to go through in a normal day to support your students. It was, it's always a very trying, I think, position to be in as a principal and running an entire building and meeting all of the needs. But I want you to know that I, as one board member, really appreciate all that I think that you all do to keep things moving along in our district and to support all of our students and their parents. It's just not the students, you all have the weight of the parents also. So thank you for all that you all do.
Well said, Ms. Henry. I agree with all of those comments 100%. And now I think we're on to Elkins Park and Mr. Wallace.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone. Can everyone see me? I can't see myself, so this is kind of weird.
We can see you. We can hear you.
So the first thing I want to say is we want to review the goals that we have for Elkins Park. So again, we want to make sure that we at least increase our scores on the PSSA by 10% for ELA and 10% for math across both. Very, very important for us to do for Elkins Park. We also want to make sure that 80% of the students that we teach every single day are able to master the skills in the classroom, at least 80%. So one of the ways that if you are able to do that is if 80% of the students are able to master the skills that are being taught. And of course, we want to make sure that we have at least 1 year's worth of growth, closing the achievement gap between special education students and our African-American students is very important. And the other one of our goals is to make sure that all of our students, and this is a hard one to measure, are having an enjoyable experience in EP. And one of the things that we started out with were 85% on a survey were able to have so far saying that they're enjoying their experience at Elkins Park. So if you look at the reading and math for grade 5 and 6, you'll notice that the majority of our students took the test. Now we only have grade 5 and 6. And the only reason why some of our students might not have been able to take the test is obviously 5th and 6th grade is unfortunately the year where we have the unvaccinated students and sometimes some students who have certain symptoms. So I won't get deep into that. As we go to the next slide, and we start out with what some of the root causes are for our data. And we notice that there are 23% of our students in 5th grade who are scoring in the blue in ELA, or a little lower than that. And then you also notice that for mathematics that we are struggling as far as students that are advanced. So I'm going to tell you the good news in a moment, but that's where we will start out. If you go to the 6th grade slide, and we'll go back to the 5th grade slide backwards, if we can go forward to 6th grade, you'll notice that it's a little bit better for ELA, as we're just above 25% of our students who scored in advance. And then you also know in 6th grade, it was a little bit lower with only in our ELA scores with a little bit under that percentage there. Now, what are some of the root causes that cause those scores? Before we look at some of the good news, one of the things that we have to remember is this, as Dr. Scriven was saying, this is the first test that a lot of our students took back in the school building, and it was taken in September. And those 5th graders who took those tests, whether it's the math or ELA benchmark test, that was the first test that some of them took in a school setting since they were in 3rd grade. And even our 6th grade students, in some cases, was the first time that they took a test like that since they were back in elementary school. So the other thing is, of course, what the pandemic did to them, what they're dealing with coming back. And of course, I did see some good news in the data, which I'm going to be very happy to report. But what are we doing to make sure we assess those scores and we get them up? And what are some of the things that we're looking at? Well, the first thing that we're doing is we're making sure that we meet weekly with our teachers and reviewing data. And at 5th and 6th grade, one of the best ways that we can review data to make sure that we're making the right decision is looking at student work weekly and our common planning times. looking at the work and seeing if we can look closely to identify the gaps in instruction. Once we're able to identify those gaps, we come up with plans to make sure that we address the individual students, to make sure that we help them increase those gaps and increase those needs. The other thing that we're doing for both ELA as well as math is making sure our students are practicing using real world problems that they will see on a PSSA or that they may see later on in tests. Practicing being able to answer open-ended questions, both in math, and practicing answering open-ended questions, as well as what we call text-dependent analysis in ELA. One of the things that we noticed that we also are practicing is the PSSA will probably most likely be given using technology, which was something a little different that we did last year. We saw, and I'm gonna show you the good news for ELA in a minute, that there actually might be an advantage to that in ELA, but making sure that students are equipped with skills for how to take a test on a computer using mathematics. So if you think of those third grade students when they left before the pandemic started, filling in Scantron sheets, filling in bubbles, answering questions, and now you're asking them to open up a Chromebook, answer questions. So do our students in mathematics know how to write out the word problems? Do they know how to look at a problem and dissect and know whether it's a multiplication problem, division problem, or how to dissect fractions? And are they able to do their work, write their answers, explain their answers, and translate that onto technology? So that is a skill that we're developing with students that I think will pay dividends in the math PSSA, as well as how our overall students perform. Again, how are we going to do this? How are we going to monitor this closely? Looking very closely at work that the students are doing, not just once in a while, not just every month, not just when we're taking the benchmark, but weekly by real student work that they're bringing to these team meetings, which we're able to analyze. And of course, that's followed up by our 3 administrators walking in the classroom and seeing. So making sure we're seeing if the gaps that are being met, the instruction that's being handed out. One thing I'll say about Elkins Park students is I agree with Mr. Lytle said. I've worked in a lot of places. I've never seen so many great experienced teachers at one place. So one of the things that we have to do is make sure that our experienced teacher, our outstanding students all combine to make sure that it shows outstanding academic performance. So with those things being said, if we go back to the 5th grade data, let's go on backwards a little bit, and we go to root cause, if we can rewind, there is good news. And the good news, I'm going to give a big shout out to our elementary schools. So even though if you look at it, our advanced students, one of the things that we look closely at our CDC data, you will know, and I say CDC, CDT, not CDC data, you will notice that if you combine proficient and advanced, how many students do we have on target? And so, and even in math for our 5th grade, there are about 41% that's on target. So yes, we need to work on math for 5th grade. But the cool part is those outstanding 4 elementary schools are sending us, if we look at on-target students, almost 73% of our students who are on target is close to the benchmark test. And that was the first benchmark test that they've taken in September. So one of the things that we are paying close attention to is our students possibly could be performing better in ELA using technology, using the skills. And these skills are definitely the skills that were implemented by the Department of Education at the Cheltenham School District. It shows that our curriculum that we have in place, some of the tools that we have for Cheltenham School District are working. And it shows you that the things that I've got to give a lot of credit to those 4 elementary schools, the students that are coming in are able to read, comprehend, and answer questions. And we often are looking at the data to see if perhaps testing using technology helps the student not to be overwhelmed by paper and turning pages, as weird as that sounds. But it does show us that 73% of our students are on task in ELA. And even in 6th grade, we had about 6% of our students, if you combine our green scores with our red scores as well. Now, we still need to work on math, and we still need to do some things. So what are we doing moving forward? So again, our goal is we've got to have that 10%. We've got to work on closing the gap. We have to also, and we noticed this with our ELA scores on the PSSA and looking at the benchmark, we've got to make sure that we have as many students in 5th and 6th grade take that test as possible. When they take it and we prepare them for it, I think the results will show a drastic improvement in mathematics. Some of the things that my colleague said through K through 4 is the same things that we're working for in 5th and 6th grade, is making sure students have a great number sense in mathematics, making sure that they understand what numbers represent, and even basic things like making sure that every 5th grader memorizes their multiplication facts and division facts, which will help them understand and do word problems and more advanced problems. But one of the things that I'm really, really excited about and hopefully can continue to grow on is the growth that even the benchmarks are showing in ELA. Now, however, we do have to see how this first benchmark is going to be compared to the second benchmark, which we'll be taking in December, to make sure that growth is being able to maintain. So the good news is, again, I actually was overjoyed a little bit about our performance in ELA. So Elkins Park is showing the benefits of our 4 elementary schools. Some of the things that we're putting in place in the Cheltenham School District is working. So we are showing some data that's showing that what we're doing is working. Our 5th grade students and our movement from increasing the scores from 5th to 6th grade, we are seeing evidence of that. Now, of course, the December benchmark will tell the tale if that is continuing to improve. And of course, as we continue working on the same skills, we believe that we should have good results when we're able to see the PSSA. We still need a lot of work to do in mathematics, and we'll continue to work on using the strategy of looking at the gaps, using student work, real world problems to make sure that we're able to help our students advance.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wallace. That's actually really great news, really. Congratulations to the elementary schools and to the students and to you at EP on the ELA performance. I think it's just really interesting, actually, because usually we often see students, sometimes struggle more on ELA and less on math. So it's really a great testament to see how well the students are doing on ELA. I think we're up to Mr. Metcalf now in Cedar Brook.
Hey, good evening, everybody. How you guys doing?
Hi, Mr. Metcalf. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm going to present the data, and then I know later on in the presentation, we have our school improvement plans to present. So I'll wait and save all that information for then. That way I don't have to go through and repeat everything I'll be saying, but I will point out some key areas. So looking at our data, just on number of scholars tested, I went back to kind of see what, why some students didn't take the test, because we do a pretty decent job going through and collecting all the scholars that need to make up the test. And some of those scholars are no longer with us, and some of those scholars also have pretty long-standing absences for various reasons. So if you're looking at just our grade 7 in reading and math, we were close to having 100% of all of our scholars be tested. Science, we obviously do not have a PSSA, so we did not look to test those scholars on the CDT for 7th grade. And then looking over at 8th grade, almost again having 100% of all of our scholars for reading, math, and science take those exams. All right, so looking at our 7th grade data for ELA and for math. Let me just move the picture. You guys are like over my data. Sorry, kind of move your picture a little bit. So one of the highlights here, and I think that we've seen throughout all the presentations thus far, has been around ELA and those and the below basic numbers. So the first thing that stood out for me was just having 0% of our scholars scoring at below basic range. I thought that was something that was really, really important. So I just, as Mr. Wallace did, I just want to kind of shout out all the English teachers and the elementary teachers, and actually all of our teachers, because honestly, coming back to school this year has been definitely a struggle for everyone, for parents, for our scholars, for administrators, for teachers. So I just want to say, great job, guys. This is just a quick snapshot of where our scholars were at that moment. And, we're looking forward to seeing, what they look like after the second benchmark, so we can actually look at some of the growth from scholar to scholar. One of the key highlights, I would say also of ELA, of our 7th grade ELA benchmark or CDT, was looking at the number of scholars that were proficient and advanced. So if we're looking there, having a total of 65% of our scholars score proficient or advanced is definitely something that we were very proud of. And so what we have to focus on is how do we move those scholars that are in the basic category up, right? And so we have various strategies of doing that. One of the ways is looking at, as we generally do, looking at some of these standards on the PSSA that kind of are the largest percentage. And so, for literature and informational text, they both account for about 37% each of the PSSA. And so our teachers have started to kind of trajectorize their focus there. And then and also on text dependent analysis, which is another high area, about 25%. Looking over at math, and as a math teacher, you can understand that, seeing about 77% of our scholars in 7th grade score basic or below, it's definitely a concern. But we have been working hard, and we do have a plan in place for supporting those scholars. Again, highlights though, I still would say having 22% of our scholars proficient or advanced is something that we're very proud of. And just to add to that, I would just say, we use IXL, and we have a lot of different, like we'll have scholars that are assigned different standards that they have to work on. We'll have a diagnostic. And so one of our goals has been trying to push our scholars to take, and do as many IXL problems as possible. I mean, I know they're pretty tired and stressed of IXL, but I do want to say, we have some scholars that have answered over 900 questions for English IXL, and then over 1,000 questions for math. 10 scholars last time I checked had answered over 900 questions for the ELA for IXL, and 15 for having 1,000 questions answered. So I think those are some of the goals, and we're going to try to cheerlead around making that into a competition, because we know when we have competition, our scholars, tend to step up and want to compete against each other. And I think that's one of the ways that we'll, kind of champion this work. So our scholars can see as many questions and many, problems as possible, so they're very familiar with what might be in front of them. And again, looking at our 8th grade benchmark, as you can see, again, I think 7%. I'm happy to see that number. That's less work that we have to worry about for our 8th grade ELA. Again, how do we move those basic scholars over into the proficient range? How do we move our proficient scholars over into the advanced range? And also, again, 62% of our scholars scoring proficient or advanced on the ELA CDT, is something that we want to be, we want to highlight and kind of recognize throughout our school, so our scholars know that they're doing a decent job, and our teachers as well. Again, looking over at the math section, obviously something that we have to work on, having 84% of our scholars score basic or below basic. One of the things that, that is a good thing of the CDT, I would definitely say, is when we go in and we dig into the data, by clicking on some of the standards that they're not performing well on, we can actually then see example problems of what our scholars, struggle with. And so again, those high areas, right? We talk about algebraic concepts, and I believe it's numbers and operations. Those two alone, they account for about 60% of the PSSA, and so our focus really is starting to shift towards that, especially as we go through our course sequencing and scope and sequence on how we address those in the future. Next slide, please. And here we have our science. And so science is a little bit different from math and English. They're not just being given 8th grade science standards, and that's what they're being tested on. Science really is encompassing 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade standards. And so over the course of the years, and having a pandemic, obviously, there's some, like, a greater amount of material that scholars were not necessarily exposed to. And so, again, having 46% of our scholars perform proficient or advanced, I think is something that we're happy to see, and trying to work on those below basic and basic numbers. And, again, as I said earlier, I will share later on in our plan what we'll be doing to support our scholars in that area. The only other thing that I want to mention before we move on, there's been a lot of talk about our scholars and teachers coming back, right? And coming, I'm not going to say out of a pandemic, because we're technically still in a pandemic, but we have to do, we're looking at ways to support our scholars, right? And our staff members. Now, I think we can't forget that. And so just wanted to, point out some of the things that we've done in those areas. And then I also, just as Jason, as well as Brian, Principal Lytle and Principal Wallace point out, that teacher coaching piece, is so important, right? Having that peer feedback, that peer interaction, and losing that for a year and a half, does have a great impact on your younger teachers who are, kind of new and coming up and trying to learn, how to incorporate instruction into their lessons a little bit differently and different strategies. And that's definitely had a great impact. But again, we're trying to do a number of different things. We have we have a program which it's called an AFA, and pretty much it's advocacy for all. And with that program, we have our we have our teachers, administrators, counselors, our librarians. It gives us opportunities to have like kind of one-on-one conversations with our scholars, so we can kind of talk to them a little bit about, how they're feeling, about their grades, about their overall social well-being. And then I want to also give Jim Taylor a huge shout out with regards to PBIS, because that really has kept us in our school, as well as our counselors, I'll say, our school, from having some fun things that kind of shift our scholars' mindsets. We had a meeting not too long ago with Mr. Luker, who works in the Attorney General's office. And one of the biggest things our scholars pointed out was they don't have time to really socialize with their friends. And so just seeing how they lost so much time, we're trying to focus on those other areas, those soft skills, the social emotional learning piece that can really support them as well, because we don't want school to kind of feel like it's just a recurring like movie that happens over and over and over again each and every single day. Go to class, take a test, come home, do homework, go to sleep. And so, I'm glad that we were able to incorporate some of our after school activities as well to support our scholars and to give our teachers just a change of pace of what they need to focus on. So that is it. And I will be talking later on about our school improvement plan.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Metcalf, for all that, for that information and update. And looks like we're on to CHS.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Lahara here.
Hi, Dr. Lahara.
So I'm going to go over the same thing as Mr. Metcalf did. We'll go over the school improvement plan later on. Just going to talk about the data. So when you look at our students, you see that our numbers aren't as high as the elementary and the 5, 6, and middle school. For ELA, we're at 73%, which is about 354 students. For math, we tested about 138 students, which is 73% as well of the possible students. And for science, 163, which is 88% of the possible students. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about the data. So the next slide. So although this is great and it looks amazing that 80% of our English students tested proficient and 16 in the basic realm. So you have about 96% of our students that tested at proficient basic and only 1% in below basic. I still want to see our percentage of students that actually are eligible to take the test, the English CDT, so that we can get a true measure. So hopefully by the next benchmark exam, we'll be able to motivate more students to take the exam. Next. If you look at our math, I mean, district-wide, if you look, math seems to be our biggest challenge. But even with that, we have room to grow, because we have 56% of our students that are in the basic area and 22% that are in the proficient. And also we have 22% that are in the below basic area. So our focus is definitely going to be working with those students that are in the basic and below basic area, while keeping our proficient students where they are. And 56% gives me a lot of hope, because I know that we can move a lot. See, we don't have the bubble kids like the elementary schools do, but the basic kids are pretty much, for us at the high school, we can look at them as the bubble kids, that they have the opportunity to either get moved into the proficient area, or, if we don't do the job, we might lose them and into the below basic area. And definitely also working with our below basic students to at least get them out of the below basic realm and show growth in our PVAS data, because you get credit for moving students out of below basic. So definitely math is our biggest, I wouldn't say challenge, but definitely the more course where we have room to grow is the Algebra 1. Next. And biology, we have the most advanced students in our biology exam, which is 28% advanced, 38% proficient. And then we have 18 and 16% respectfully in basic and below basic. So again, really working to keep those, either move those proficient students to advanced, but at best, definitely keep them where they are while we move the basic and below basic students to either proficient or advanced. And we're definitely going to talk about it in the school improvement plan, and you've heard all the principals say the same thing, so I'm really not going to repeat it. But high school is a different animal when you talk about just routines, talking about students, consistency, and instruction overall. So I'll talk a little bit about that during the school improvement, but that's the data that we have. And to talk about the percentage of students that actually took the exam, Dr. Scriven forgot me earlier. This is my first full year, if we actually get to the whole school year at the high school. I only had, half a year during the pandemic, so I really didn't get to see.
My apologies, sir.
Oh, no, you good. You good. I was going to chime in earlier, but I didn't want to do that. But, definitely in talking to my teachers who gave the benchmark and to my administrators, this is something that historically happens at the high school due to a couple of factors. One is that, the Keystone exam is still not set in stone when it's going to count for graduation purposes. So it's tough for students to take that, I don't want to say seriously, but actually to motivate students, to take the Keystone exam. And then that falls into, the benchmark exam as well. It's what's my motivator. You can't get a 0 for not taking a benchmark exam in the high school. So there's really nothing, for us to attach it to. And the kids are a little older, so we can't just say, hey, you got to take this exam. So this is definitely a conversation that after I saw the actual percentage of students that took the benchmark exam versus the possible amount of students that could have taken it, definitely led me to have a conversation with my administrators and teachers and how we can motivate our students and, and incentivize them in a way for them to, for all of them to participate in the benchmark exam, for us to get a true picture and a true baseline of where we are. I mean, this will give us a, good groundwork. I mean, it's over 70%. So I would like to think, and maybe Mr. Schultz will chime in later, I would like to think that 70% or above is a good chunk of students to work with, but we definitely want to be at 100% so that we definitely have a good, a good baseline of where our students really are. But that's all I'll say about the data right now, and then we'll talk about the school priorities and desired outcomes later on. Thank you.
So data beyond the benchmark, all the principals did a good job of giving context to what the benchmarks are used for, how often they're taken, and what kind of data we get from them. This slide is just in place to give our board, as well as any members of the public who are attending, a window of other data that we also collect and other things that we also look at. So as you can see, attendance, behavior is kind of what falls under some of the social emotional items and areas that people have discussed. Common assessments, next steps guided reading, I know was mentioned at least once. Our Acadience program that we use for Dibbles, Ames Web, IXL. And this is not meant to be a comprehensive list, but just to give you an idea that benchmark data is not the only data that is available to our teachers and available to our administrators. And the good news is all of this data can be accessed and can be housed in the Linkit data warehouse. So even though we're no longer taking Linkit benchmark assessments, grades 3 through 8, all of the data does still live in their data warehouse, as well as the CDT data lives there as well. Also, all of the selected data sets, they can be curated into what is called an FSP, which is a fingertip student profile. So when you look at the list, for example, under bullet 1 of all the things that could go into the warehouse, it may seem a little overwhelming, and we may wonder, you know, how do you keep track of it all? There is a way for teachers to kind of look at what's called a fingertip student profile, just to look at everything kind of in one quick snapshot. And so what you see on the screen is a sample of a fingertip student profile. This is not one that reflects Cheltenham. This is strictly a sample. When you look at this sample, you can see the attendance and behavior listed here. You can see the course grades and also the 2 linked benchmarks that were administered. So teachers can go in and look at this to get a snapshot of a kid. So for example, if you're thinking about whether or not a student is making appropriate progress and you're trying to compare from subject to subject, you see the skills are listed, you see the general items that are typically listed under standards. So they do have these particular things. If you notice up at the top, the grade, the gender, just some general demographics. Is this an economically disadvantaged label student, gifted student, ELL student, 504, or special education? So our teachers do have this at their disposal as they're planning their win groups, as they're planning for interventions, as they're meeting and talking to parents about progress or talking amongst each other about progress. They have access to this. So although there are multiple sources of data and they're all stored in one place, there is a nice, organized, and neat way to display this. And so the next set of slides is a set of slides that pretty much kind of reintroduces the multi-tiered system of support to our board. When I checked my old files, we had originally did this presentation back in 2017. We presented it to our principals, and then we presented it at a FAIRS meeting that 2017-2018 school year. And the purpose of bringing this into the slide is this kind of helps guide the conversation that the principals will continue to have around, now that we have the data, what's next? And so this picture that you're looking at is a graphic that organizes the Pennsylvania MTSS system. And as you can see, the larger circle requires and calls for equitable access for all students. As you can see, the circle, when you see the arrows are letting you know that this is a cyclical activity. These are events that go on. You don't necessarily always start in the same spot, but you continue that cycle. So you have to define what is the problem, analyze what is occurring, implement, what are we going to do, evaluate, is it working? And that cycle starts over. That circle goes around that middle triangle, which basically tells us that we're looking at students academically, we're looking at their behavior, and we're also looking at social emotional. And this really captures Pennsylvania's shift from response to intervention and instruction to a true MTSS system that looks at all systems and all levels of support. And with MTSS, there's an essential shift in thinking. So instead of us thinking, what about the students is causing the performance discrepancy? What's going on with the children? I think I heard Ms. Robinson say, how are the children? So in this case, we're not looking at performance as something that the kids have done or something that is symptomatic of who the children are. Instead, we're looking at how is the interaction of the curriculum, the instruction, the learners, and the learning environment. How do we alter those things so that all students will learn? And the shift from RTII and the shift from traditional instruction and to really focus on MTSS helps us to answer the true essential question as we move towards improvement. Again, this graphic is a reminder of our MTSS system that we have in Cheltenham. If you look at this if you look at this triangle, you see that the bulk of the students are at the base of the triangle, that 80 to 90%. Those are our tier 1 students. That's where all students receive instruction. That's where we're preventive, we're proactive. That's where we differentiate instruction to make sure that all kids get what they need. And that's when we're looking at the larger group. And there are some children after tier 1 who may need some additional support. So at this level, our students get more support and more time. So you may see some students here who are at risk. This is where we also have some of our small group interventions. This may be where some of their kids, some of our students spend their win time. And when you get to the top of the triangle, this is where we have our tier 3 interventions where students get the most of something here. So it goes from everyone to more to most. And you'll see different variations of this triangle throughout educational pedagogy. Some people will give you the upside down inverted triangle. Some will present it this way. We chose to highlight this particular one because this comes directly out of a former presentation that we shared with the school board of directors and also share with the community so that we can have some consistency. So as the principals talk about school improvement and they talk about planning, what they are talking about is this triangle, essentially, how they're going from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. They're making sure that kids who don't get it when it's taught to the entire group at tier 1 or don't get it when it's whole group instruction, that there's something that happens at tier 2 to give them additional support. And for any of our children who are still in need of help, that red part of this triangle at the top represents going a little deeper into their level of support. And so with that, school improvement planning, we have in Cheltenham used a school improvement plan to respond to data, to respond to students' performance at schools. And we've done this, the last document I was able to find was from the 2018-2019. That was probably the oldest document. And with school improvement planning, there's always been a focus on the academic side of the students, as well as a focus on the social emotional side of the students. And Dr. Horsey, our past immediate director of student services, was a really big proponent and really big cheerleader that whenever we talked about school improvement planning, and those from my office can attest to this, she never let us leave the table without having that social emotional discussion. She always made sure that that was kind of the backdrop and also in a lot of places, the forefront of our conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Pimentel.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Mr. Pimentel. I'm just going to hop in here for 1 second, if you don't mind, and just see if there, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the school improvement planning, see if there's any additional questions from the board members about the data that was just presented, or if any of the members of the community who are on as attendees have any questions, they can raise their hands and we can unmute them. So first of all, anything more from any of the board members? And then
I do have some questions, not necessarily about the data, but they can wait until the end of the presentation.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ms. Henry. Okay. Then I think I don't see any hands raised. So sorry, Mr. Pimentel, take it away.
Okay. Dr. Smith, if you could go to the next slide, please. So what I'm introducing here is the form that is used by principals to prepare their data when looking to create an action plan. So the form itself is based on experimental systems change theory, or just more simply, an experimental design. So the first part of the form is asking the principals to identify salient data points. And one way to think of this from the experimental design is that this is the dependent variable. And there's then an analysis of data, a set of action steps, which is what the principal is putting forward as their prescription. And that is the independent variable, which is then looks to impact the dependent variable in the future when we go back to do future data reviews. So when looking at these forms, what you should be thinking is that you're essentially looking at an experimental design. And so what is it the principal is saying that they're going to do, and what impact are they anticipating that that's going to have? So next slide, please.
Before we go to that slide, can I ask for some clarification?
Sure.
Okay, so if you could go back to the previous slide, the first one that you shared with the salient data and that information. All right, so I need you to break that down in layman's terms. You could have been talking another language there. What is an example of salient data? The analysis, I'm pretty good with. The independent variable, like kind of give us some examples before we get into that form of what that is.
Sure. So I guess like a very simple example would be, you know, your salient data or the dependent variable would be, say, you know, students are underperforming in math. So that's something that you recognize when you look at your school's data. And so because that's something that comes up to the top, there's a particular number, whatever it might be, 40% of students are below basic or something. And so then recognizing that this is salient data, your next step then is to analyze that data, break it down, look at it by demographic groups, by age group, by who's in which classroom, all that kind of stuff. And then the independent variable is the thing that's going to be done that will have an impact on the dependent variable. So for example, it's decided that we're going to do more teacher coaching, might be an example. So we're going to do instructional coaching for math teachers. That's the action step. And just like an experiment, your hypothesis is that by providing teacher coaching for math teachers, you're going to have an impact on the dependent variable, which is the 40% below basic in math number. And then once you have applied that independent variable, then of course you go back and evaluate your progress. So in other words, you look at the data again. Has it moved? Have we moved to a more successful place? The ultimate purpose of this is to, you know, what's the old statement? Like, you know, there's statistics and then there's lies or something like that. The purpose here is to try to get down to the nitty-gritty of the data you're looking at, what exactly you're going to do with it, and what anticipated effects you're hoping to have as a result of the action steps that you are taking. So that's sort of the overarching purpose or theory behind the way that we approach this.
Thank you. That explanation helped greatly.
So the next slide, please. So then this is the actual form. So let me just kind of walk you through it so that you can see there in the top part is the salient data. Again, that's the data that jumps off the page, so to speak, for something that needs to be addressed. Then the next section is the data analysis part, which on this form, you see it referenced as root causes contributing to the effect seen above. So it's asking those who are doing the data review, what do you believe is at the heart of this problem? What data or evidence do you have to support this hypothesis? It's asking you to look at the salient data and to try to dig underneath it and figure out what's really going on. And you're specifically looking for something that is going to justify what comes next. So the next piece then is the school priority or priorities. So what is it that is going to happen next? What is it that you're going to do that's ultimately going to impact the salient data? And whatever it is you're doing in that school priority section should be informed by your root causes. So they should all be very clearly linked to one another. And then lastly is the desired outcome. So this is about putting a specific measurable target on what impacts you're hoping to have. So again, in the example that I just used, if you have 40% below basic, you're going to implement teacher coaching for math teachers, and your desired outcome is a reduction in below basic students of 10%. So you're shooting for 30% at the next benchmark, or whatever the next assessment might be. So that desired outcome should be something that is very clearly measurable. And then after that, the action section that you see below, that's like the very specific action steps that get taken. And then the things that would be looked for for progress. So in other words, what are some things that we can look at along the way? Let's not wait for the benchmark. What are some things that we could do between now and the next benchmark that would be indicators that we are moving in the right direction? So this data plan that you see here is basically what is the foundation for the slides that will be presented next by principals. You'll basically see this structure in a slightly different format, and the principals will run through those 4 key sections at the top. So next slide, please. Sorry, next slide after that as well. Okay, and we are now back to Mr. Perez.
So a lot of what is shared on my action plan was already shared when I shared the data. So I don't want to repeat, just to make note that obviously the data that I shared with you and my concerns are on the left side in the salient data. A lot of the root causes I did kind of go through, and what our priorities are. On the right, one thing I didn't delve into as much, but sharing what our desired outcomes are, and for the most part is reducing the number of students in our below basic, in our basic ranges, and our lowest quartiles, at least by 10%. Mathematics will be our focus for our Linkit and our CDT, and also reducing it in our ELA as well in third grade specifically, third and fourth grade, in targeting our from our first to our third benchmarks.
Similarly, I'm going to echo my colleague, Nick. A lot of what is shared here was shared along with the data points. And, you know, we have the salient data is we're like halfway there as far as our baseline data. There's some disparity that still persists amongst our subgroups, and that we want to leverage forward, the need to leverage forward a really intentional focus on the well-being of our students and our teachers. That data that's not presented in our benchmark data is just as important as our academic data in terms of how we're going to move our students to continued success. The root causes really, as I outlined before, we tend to think of those as our areas of opportunity. And so we'll continue to work as a school team along with my colleagues in central office to really drill down on our school priorities, which is really supporting teachers on becoming content experts, you know, extending that collaboration and communication between teachers, giving them time to collaborate with each other, and really seeing themselves as a team for the students that they're serving. Sometimes you'll find that, you know, students that are getting services with in WIN or services by a special education teacher, there used to be this trend of that's your student, that's your students, but we've changed our language. They're our students. And it was so beautiful today to sit in on some of the parent-teacher conferences and see those teams at work, and the parents were so appreciative of the way that you know, everyone could speak really clearly about the needs of the students, and it was really clear that they were working together to meet the needs of those students. Also, just pointing out that being transparent about our data, you know, making that data available school-wide so that we could see where we've been and see where we're going. And then also prioritizing that MTSS system, PBIS, culture proficiency, mindfulness, and on my part, being flexible in this pandemic-related time that we're in as it relates to stress and anxiety, absences, and trauma. So I shared before what our desired outcomes are. They remain the same, and we're looking forward to having a wonderful year.
Hello again, everyone. As I stated earlier, I'm very excited about the opportunity that has presented itself as we examine our baseline data. Having already discussed that salient data and some of the root causes, our priorities as relates to the population of scholars at Myers is to look at the lens of that multi-tiered system of supports as we talk about academics, behavior, and social emotional learning, and the various tiers of support that we can offer, keeping the data in mind. So we want to utilize PBIS to create a consistent opportunities for students to express themselves regarding academic and non-academic topics. We understand that as we talk about the impact of the pandemic, that we need to have avenues and opportunities for students to express themselves on topics that are not academically related. We already know that students care how much you care before they care what you know. And we need to make sure that we have an opportunity for students to have the mindset and the opportunity to handle and embrace the contact with as few disruptors as possible. So we're going to use PBIS to make sure that we're consistent across the board as it relates to our expectations for student conduct, as it relates to opportunities to celebrate student growth, not just achievement, as it relates to what we expect from our school as a whole, really trying to infuse a culture of learning. And when I say culture of learning, it is the opportunity for the students to embrace and to take ownership of their learning and to see exactly the importance and their role as learners inside of that classroom. We hope to cultivate that school-wide. Teachers come with that. They are already excited about the content. They're already knowledgeable about the content. They already are owning the data and using it to drive instruction. But when we can cross that over to our students through PBIS and get them to embrace their own data and to set goals and to embrace learning and to simplify it that achievement is cool, then we can move holistically as a school towards our goals with everyone focusing their efforts on the same goal. PBIS is an excellent tool to accomplish that school culture and to motivate students academically, as well as supporting them socially and emotionally and with their behavior. One of the other things that is essential, and all of us as principals have talked about this, is teacher coaching, but furthermore, establishing at Myers the three, what I like to call pillars of how we're approaching instruction. And they are simple. We're standards-based instruction. We're not teaching what we want. We're teaching what students at that grade level need to know, but we're also teaching what kids, where those gaps are in order to meet those standards. We don't teach standards in their entirety. A standard is too big to teach. It's too much to swallow at one time. So we say that teaching is not rocket science. It is, because you have to take that big thing and you need to change it into something that is smaller so that it's palatable and so that students can have access to it. So we talk about standard-based instruction. We talk about the gradual release of responsibility of instruction, where we engage. We purposely structure our lessons to increase student engagement and opportunities for them to come into contact meaningfully with the content. And we talk about small group instruction. Small group instruction is probably the most essential part of what we are utilizing at Myers as it relates to meeting the individual needs of students. We're using flexible database groups in order to address deficit skills, in order to enrich and extend learning so that we're meeting the needs of all of our learners. We use a variety of tools in order to accomplish those things. That small group instruction takes place during the WIN period as well as during the whole instructional block, where teachers are starting to own and have some of those conversations that are a principal's dream as they bring data conversations to you, as opposed to you always bringing the data conversation to them. Well, in addition to that, increasing the amount of feedback that teachers are able to give to individual students regarding their progress. We talk about assessments repeatedly, but in order for me to move forward, in order for me to make progress, I need to have feedback that aligns to my individual performance, and that your knowledge of me guides me in and what type of feedback you give me in order to help me attain that particular standard. One thing that is common among all K-4 schools that is a very helpful tool into addressing some of these, some of the data that we've seen is a common planning time for teachers to collaborate with one another, PLC or data meetings weekly and frequently, where we address climate trends, data trends, grade level trends, whatever it might be. Strategic alignment of the teachers selected LEA goal to align with our school data so that we're all working in harmony towards the same goal with all of our efforts. Dr. Smith already elaborated on the multi-tiered system of supports. And once again, now that we see that data is not broken down into individual students. It doesn't tell us the individual needs of hunger or fear or trauma or any of those things. So when we have our multi-tiered system of support meetings bi-weekly, where we have all of our stakeholders at the table who can support students, from our speech therapists to our psychologists to our teachers, we're able to look at a holistic picture of that child and look at what the individual needs of those children are as we work with that individual scholar to meet their desired outcome. Mr. Perez also talked about the use of computer-based interventions as a tool that we're utilizing in order to help meet the needs of our students in school, and not just the usage of computer-based interventions, but the monitoring and using of the data that those computer-based interventions produce in order to inform instruction as a primary tool. And lastly, ongoing communication with our parents is essential. We know that when parents are involved and when parents are informed, that students have better outcomes. So consistent and ongoing communication with parents regarding not just behavior, not just school events, but what is the instructional plan, the instructional focus, and the instructional skill that we're working on, and ways that parents can be more engaged in what their children are learning. Thank you.
Dr. Clark, you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. Some of the data that I see according to this slide just really talks about some of the work that we're doing with our social emotional learning. As I indicated before, that many of our students are having a difficult time with understanding the whole feel and nature of school. And so we're doing some work with PBIS as well, as Mr. Lytle just talked about. And I'd like to actually get the perspective of how well PBIS is working in our school from our first grade teachers who are dealing with students who are experiencing a full year of school for the first time. So that's pretty much what this slide talks about. We're actually discussing expectations. We're having monthly team meetings. We've created an SEL period that meets each day. We review our Swiss data, as well as that really talks about our behavioral data, as well as all of the interventions that we've put into place, and we're getting a sense of what's working and what's not. If I could, I did have some additional salient data that has not been placed on this slide, where I really talked about math data, which I mentioned before, where we do have some concerns regarding the trend data as it relates to mathematics at Wingcoat, where it has shown extreme inconsistency over time. When I look at a 5-year trend, I do have a goal as it relates to looking at the end and keeping the end in mind, and wanting our students to really focus on their basic facts, as well as fractions and geometry, since those are areas that the data has been able to pinpoint are areas of needed improvement. And so our hope is to increase our overall PSSA math scores in 4th grade from what the 5-year trend has been, which is 58.2%, to increase that by 10%. With some of the strategies, interventions, and supports that we've put in place. Also, our ELA data for third grade has tremendously flatlined over the years. And so we are looking at working with genre characteristics, interpreting visuals and graphics, craft structure, as well as integration and knowledge of ideas as a way to kind of increase some of our reading scores from being so flat. We do, like as I mentioned earlier, I believe that some of the root causes to some of these data points include lack of consistency with some of our professional development, which was, we did lose some momentum with our professional development due to COVID. And so we are kind of working with administration as well as with our own schools and trying to kind of, take a step back and revisit some of those areas so that teachers are implementing resources with fidelity. My school priorities are looking at data walls for every classroom as we continue to take a comprehensive review of school benchmark data, whether it's our linkage, our CDTs, and kind of look at that data during each cycle. We're also adjusting our pacing and curriculum topics to ensure that materials are covered in time for various testing that goes on. We are utilizing student resources with fidelity. We're looking at the resources that we have and looking at ways that we could utilize them more efficiently in order to meet some of the content that is needed for our testing that comes up in the spring. We're also looking at ways that we can consistently acknowledge our students for a job well done. We've incorporated our students in being a part of their success. And so we acknowledge any milestones with basic facts. We do that daily, whether it's basic facts, whether it's vocabulary improvements. We acknowledge students and we want students to chart their progress so they are a part of the whole process of improvement. And we've established a skill builders, our beyond school day tutoring program. And again, I mentioned that we target our bubble students for that, as well as partnering with Arcadia University and our STREAM programs, which really support some of our innovation as we move forward with our STEAM concepts. So, our desired outcomes are really looking at some improvements with our overall reading and math scores. Thank you.
So at Elkins Park, we are experiencing some of the data that is showing us that we need to have more of our students performing proficient and advanced in mathematics. Mathematics is probably our number one concern when it looks at benchmark data, when we look at student work data, and when we look at PSSA data. For ELA, we're seeing the same kind of data that we're a little concerned of. We want to have more students performing proficient and advanced on the PSSA, as well as scoring higher on the benchmark. When we look at both math and ELA, and we look at some of the root causes, one of the things that we did notice from the PSSA, and it's a little bit different on the benchmark and how it looks, but students are struggling a little bit with answering open-ended questions. So for ELA, that looks like text-dependent analysis. And for mathematics, that looks like our good old word problems, as well as answering open-ended math questions in which they have to explain their work. So those are some of the things. What are some of the causes of this? It could be the fact for mathematics, again, we talked about this a little earlier, that they're using technology, and now they have to answer a question on a test, the PSSA or a benchmark, using a computer to sort of do the work, show their work, explain their work, something that they're used to using pen and paper. Now they have to use technology for it. For ELA, again, we're seeing some positive results, but again, building up the stamina of being able to write longer, and well as to read longer. And we could look at some of the things that went on during the pandemic that probably could have caused that. Our school priority, again, is to use data to find out what the gaps are, to use those data meetings to work on the gap, to target analysis of the ELA, to practice writing in ELA and practice answering those open-ended questions, to practice writing and looking at the instructional gaps when we look at that data, to work on them as well as to improve that skill. And for mathematics, we're going to dig even deeper when we are going to work on what numbers mean so they understand number relationships. For fifth graders, it's very important that all of our fifth graders memorize their multiplication facts and division facts, as well as know what numbers represent, including fractions, and are able to answer those open-ended questions. So we'll be practicing them weekly, as well as to build up their understanding and fluency in numbers, extremely important. We plan on doing this, again, by looking very closely at the work that we're producing and being able to monitor it every single week to see if we're addressing the gap with the outstanding instruction that's taking place in the classroom, as well as all our students improving, and track their improvement as they go on week to week. The goals and desired outcomes are at least 10% of our students will increase. And the very next benchmark that we're taking, so the benchmark that we'll take will compare how we did in September versus how we're doing in December to see if we're making growth. Is there any adjustments that we need to make? Do we need to revisit our plan and tweak some things? What's working and what's not? We also will look closely again at the desired outcome of students being real fluent with mathematics in a way that they're going to be able to answer open-ended questions, whether it's using technology or solving those math problems, or work them out and answer them and get the correct answer. And again, we'll check their text-dependent analysis for ELA and their open-ended questions for mathematics to see if we're having that gain. And also the last desired outcome is also in that we are improving our achievement gap when it comes to our African-American students, as well as our students who have IEPs, so that all of our students under our care will make significant achievement, as well as hit their goals for outcomes for the school year.
Mr. Metcalf, I think you're muted.
Yes, I was. Thank you very much. I was talking to myself for a while. So first is going over the salient data again. Our data, if we're looking at, just talking about seventh grade with regards to English, having 34% of our scholars that are basic or below basic, clearly not having any below basic, but having 34% of our scholars that are scoring the basic range. That's an area of focus that we want to kind of capitalize on, right? And so as I spoke earlier, one of the things we want to do is, how do we, that's like our bubble group, like we've talked about bubble kids and things like that, but that literally is our bubble group of kids. How do we move those kids over to proficiency? We talk about seventh grade math. We're talking about 77% of our scholars that are basic or below basic, so looking at our basic kids, 33%, that right there is kind of our targeted bubble group to try to move them to proficiency right away. And then again, trying to move our below basic scholars up to basic. And so as we, continue on for our next benchmark, wanting to see those results. Same thing with eighth grade, looking at a total of 38% of our scholars that are scoring in ELA that are scoring basic and below basic. Again, how do we, look at our scholars that are performing in the basic range and focusing on them, because they might be just one standard away, right? Like really understanding one standard to move over into proficient range. And that's kind of an easy fix if we can get down to digging into that data and looking at exactly what, those scholars need. Again, same thing with math. As I said before, and as a math teacher, I take this part very personal. I'm literally at all the, or trying to be, I'll say, at all of the PLC meetings for math, because I want to make sure that, we have some targeted items that we're attacking and making sure that we're handling as our scholars and teachers, go into our win periods to target that key instruction. So root causes, right? We've all talked about the pandemic. We know the impact that the pandemic has had on culture, I think, number one, and so when we think about school culture, how is it impacted? So we're looking at, one, scholars having to change their routines. If I'm looking at a 7th grade scholar, I'm gonna be honest, like they came into school as 5th graders, right? So we saw a lot of changes in behavior. And I would say, as one of the greatest cultures that exists is school culture, we're working to, kind of shift those scholars' behaviors. And that goes not just from behavior changes, right? But also just expectations around academics, around, going to class, around not being in the hallway, teaching our scholars, how to just be scholars, and that sounds, it could sound one way to others, but, we're trying to create scholar identities within our school. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you have to be so focused on academics, but it does mean when we're in the classroom, we're about our business. So I think that impact has definitely, for all teachers has been kind of a highlight, and so how do we, when we have scholars in our classrooms, how do we focus in on, teaching those skills? And so we've done a lot of that through our WIN period, because we do have a social emotional learning piece that's tied into one of our WIN classes. And those WIN periods actually have a lesson that our teachers have been teaching to our scholars, right? So it could be something on, how to make good friends, right? It could be something on certain expectations that we want to exist. It could be on, other topics that we may have on, like closing the achievement gap, or last week was Transgender Awareness Week. And so how do we continue to support our scholars around all these other topics that they're being faced with, on a continuous basis? I also want to just talk about, the whole idea of the difference between ELA, math, and science, and why those root causes may also exist. Because I think, it's something that we need to focus in on, right? ELA, they go through a different progression of teaching and learning with regards to skills that are taught, and that's different from math and science. So our English skills that our scholars are learning pretty much from kindergarten on up, while they may change with regards to rigor and progression, that's different from math. When a scholar gets to, let's say, middle school, and it could be happening earlier, but now they're kind of trying to figure out, all right, what's a variable? Like, I've never seen this before. Or why is this variable interacting in this way now, right? It's a brand new skill that they've never been taught. Maybe they had a concept of it, but never being taught some of those skills has definitely an impact. And I think traditionally why we see our math scores being lower through the years is because our scholars just haven't had that same type of foundation that they've had through the years coming up with English. It's different. Same thing with science. I think science, we always have a concern because it's not really like an 8th grade science PSSA, right? Those skills are coming to us from years of knowledge and work that those scholars have had from 5th grade on up to 8th grade when they take it. And so those two differences, I think, have also, caused a huge impact. As you see, almost every school, their English scores are well outperforming their math scores. And that's no different for Cedar Brook as well. So what are some of our priorities? And I might list some more things that are not on this list here, but utilization of IXL to individually target weak skill areas and the tested subjects. So I think Jason talked about, how do we use small grouping, right? And so in our IXL class, well, not IXL, in our WIN classes, our scholars, like some may be assigned to IXL, right? And so that's done through teacher data, teachers looking at certain data like, hey, this group needs this group needs that, this group needs this. And then the teachers are also doing small group pullout, which is giving them that more individual focused attention that they'll need. And that's happening throughout all of our classes, right? That's happening throughout the math WIN, that's happening throughout the ELA WIN, that's happening throughout the science WIN. And so that alone, I think that small group instruction is having a huge impact. One of the areas that I think is also having a huge impact is definitely during our PLC time and our team meetings. So we did speak a little bit about MTSS tonight, so I do want to, address that. I would say Cedar Brook it's probably the best MTSS process that I've ever seen. And that's, I have 20 years of experience and I've not seen an MTSS process done in that manner. And so as I, looking at those slides from previous, the slides said, and I was really intent to focus on that. It really talked about what do we change about our programming in order to support our scholars, not what do we change about our scholar, right, in order for them to fit into our program. And I think that's a shift for a lot of us to try to think differently about what's going on with our schools that we need to change to ensure that we can support all of our scholars. And so our MTSS process has been focused on that. We do review on a biweekly basis, looking at scholar data, whether that be academic as well as behavioral, as well as cultural shifts. I think one of the beauties also has been for us, our team meetings. Our team meetings where our teams are actually, they're talking about scholars and, some of the things that they might be noticing in the classrooms. They're actually able to meet with a scholar on a one-on-one basis if they so choose to kind of support that scholar and see what's going on. And then they can then provide some of the data to us as we kind of move forward with the other supports. I think the PLC as well. So we talk about looking at student data. So our teachers are looking at that student data in those PLCs. They're also looking at our common assessment data, right? That's helping them to inform their practice. We talk about teacher coaching. Well, when we're looking at common assessments, that's really adding a whole nother layer of, hey, well, your scholar scored this one, the same exact test. What are you doing in your class and not doing in mine? How do we inform each other of some of the different practices? How do we share and practices that you're doing that can kind of improve my instruction? When you have a different variety of teachers, I think that's really important to have that opportunity for teachers to be able to share with their different instructional practices and look at that student data, which again is so important. Just with regards to the rest of our WIN classes, one of the beauties of IXL has been that IXL also does flexible grouping for you, right? And so that's made it a little bit easier for our teachers to look at the standards that they're currently teaching and then be able to identify how they're going to then, utilize the flexible grouping of IXL to create different groups when they have their WIN period. But also just taking a step further, we are on blocks or we're a modified block, I guess you would call it. And so we've had 20 minutes of instruction about roughly added on to the rest of our classes. And so one of the priorities that we've been, really looking at is emphasizing with our teachers, the idea of having small group instruction, small group pullout within the classroom. So, and that can occur in many different ways. And so one of the things we've been really trying to ensure, like during those PD sessions, that we're highlighting through PD, how they can actually utilize the modified block better to inform scholars of the instruction, and so looking at that student data, knowing your scholars, utilizing formative assessments over and over again to try to track student data and understand, what scholars need to be pulled out is just, it's a skill and a concept that we're trying to make sure that all of our teachers are proficient with. And sorry, just trying to shift back here for a second. Right, and so I'll move on to our desired outcomes, sorry. And so across the board, I think one of the areas that we're trying to do, obviously, is improve our academic outcomes on our benchmark. So our goal is to have at least a 10% gain. And I would say two ways, right? At least have our scholars improve by 10%, and at least also have our overall proficiency ratings improved by 10%. That's for math, English, and science.
Good evening again. What I didn't get to talk about earlier was the root causes and what our priorities were. I already talked about the salient data, the 56% of basic and 22% of below basic students in Algebra 1 being our main priority, our main focus. And obviously, I'll tell you, like the students said to me. So we also had a meeting with Anthony Luker from the District Attorney's Office. And our meeting was with strictly 11th grade students. And we just had them describe, what the last couple of years have been for them. And they say, Dr. Lahar, 9th grade, we only had half a year. And then 10th grade was pretty much a blur. And to us, 10th grade didn't really happen because we were pretty much virtual the whole year. We felt bad for teachers trying to engage kids in the virtual setting. Kids weren't turning on their cameras. They were having a hard time, engaging students. Students didn't want to participate. So we felt that our 10th grade year was pretty much a gap in our education. And now we're getting into our 11th grade year, and everything is just so fast paced. There's so much work being put on us right now that we're still trying to catch up. Again, at the high school, there are a lot of differences in what we deal with our scholars. Not to diminish what happens at every other school, but in terms of students really being able to articulate their feelings and what they've been going through, it's a humbling experience to sit down with a scholar and have them tell you, what their feelings have been, what they've thought about, doing and not doing, and just how overall challenging just being a student has been in the last couple of years. So really our root causes, not just for our students, but for our staff as well, really trying to get acclimated to what being a teacher is again, having a student sitting in front of you versus on the other side of a screen. So I, definitely taking, caution with that and making sure that, that our teachers are in an environment that it's not only safe, but that it's an environment of learning for our students. So our priorities definitely, and the other thing that I want to, kind of divulge is that, we're not only are we coming back to a new school year and having students 100% in person, but we're also dealing with a new schedule, right? So, the high school, and I don't think Craig gave himself credit, but, we're both dealing with a new block schedule this year, which is a whole new learning shift for our teachers. But with that, with great sacrifice come great gain as well, because now we have, not only do we have time for teachers to meet with each other for PLC, which we didn't have at the high school before, but we also have times for students to meet with their teachers, because we have an intervention period that happens every day. On a blue day, it happens in the morning, and on a gold day, it happens in the afternoon. But this intervention gives opportunity for either a teacher to call a student. So if Mr. Schultz, for example, was struggling in Algebra 1, and he's not doing so well in Mr. Metcalf's class, Mr. Metcalf can give a pass to Mr. Schultz and say, hey, Dan, come see me doing intervention tomorrow, and I can help you with, the deficiencies that you're having in Algebra 1. And, Mr. Schultz will have his hall pass. He would go see Mr. Metcalf and, be with Mr. Metcalf for that intervention period to make sure that Mr. Metcalf is giving him the support that he needs. So when I say, meeting our students where they're at, many of our students, are struggling. They do need that extra support, and I'm happy to report that we are providing that support for our scholars. We're also providing, after school tutoring as well, not only through our National Honor Society do we have tutoring, but we're also through the Office of Education. We put together a homework club for our scholars, to help them with whatever they need as well. But in terms of meeting the students where they are for Algebra 1, biology, and English, it's really, data driven, just like every other principal talked about today. It's really looking at the data and seeing what interventions are needed for those students. Now for second semester, we're really looking at having that conversation with our teachers because this year has been new for PLC. So we've been giving them that time to meet with each other and talk about, common assessments, how to create common assessments, building, course expectations and things like that. But the conversation is for second semester for us to really meet with our teachers and talk about data, talk about student work, and talk about how to really meet the needs of our scholars. It's been a challenging year for all of us. And the one thing that I'll say is that for our 9th and 10th grade students, it's been a real struggle, as Dr. Scriven mentioned earlier, for our K-3 students. A 9th grader, the last time they had a full school year with no interruptions, they were a 6th grader, right? So when you put that into perspective, they never had a middle school experience. So just coming into the high school has been a totally different experience in terms of, how do I behave in a high school when I have to transition, 4 or 5 times a day, be in a lunchroom with kids and, not walk the halls and make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I would be remiss if I don't say how much of a challenge that has been for us at the high school. But I will say that that's something that the administration goes in every single day with a laser focus, trying to make sure that we keep Cheltenham High School a safe learning environment for all of our scholars. And, the desired outcomes is definitely to make sure that we have a 10% increase in proficiency in all 3 of our tested subjects in Algebra 1, biology, and English. So with that, I'll leave it to the MC. Thank you.
And so next steps as it pertains to the central office, we'll be supporting the principals and finalizing their final plans, making sure that they have what they need from us to be successful and to make any changes or implementations that they need to make. So we'll be collaborating with principals and giving feedback on improvement planning and monitoring progress. That'll be something different for us this year. We're also going to provide human and financial resources to support the school improvement, specifically as it relates to school-based plans, because we know different schools based on their data need different levels of support. We are also going to continue to arrange and support professional development opportunities for teachers and administrators. We're going to review observation data and feedback, because the best laid plans, whether it be instructional plans or school improvement plans, they not only need to be implemented, but they need to be observed. And also our instructional staff need regular feedback so that they can continue to do what is working and also have support when things need to change. We are also going to include school improvement planning as a standing CIPD agenda topic. And the reason for that level of support is because CIPD is a nice, healthy mix of teachers, school-based administrators, and also central office administrators. And that is a place where we collaborate and we have a safe space to take risks. And so school improvement planning in that space seems to be a very appropriate place as well. And we're also going to provide leader support and school support that is supported by the data that is before us. And again, although tonight's presentation, the request was specifically around benchmark data, school improvement planning is also going to take into consideration all data that is available at our school buildings. And with that, I turn things back over to Ms. Lohman.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith. And thank you to all the 7 principals on for their presentations, for their analysis, for all of your hard work in, analyzing all this data and working day in and day out, and to try to make the school experience a positive one for all of our students. So we're very appreciative of that. I'm going to just first open it up to the board and see if anybody has any questions. Ask you to raise your hand, and I'll call on you. And then after we do board questions, we'll hand it over to the community. Okay, so I see Mr. Cohen, then Ms. Henry, and then Ms. Haywood, and then Mr. Schultz. So, Mr. Cohen, I believe you're up first.
Thank you. I have a few questions. In the interest of time, I'll keep them brief, and they might not be able to be answered tonight. My first question is that we have 4 different K through 4 schools, and understand that they're each different, they're each unique, and they each have their own leadership style with the principals, which I respect. My question, though, is having the principals work together through central administration and looking at ways of cooperating or deciding when there are contrasts in the approaches for the school improvement plans in terms of how they can basically learn from each other, and where they are divergent paths that are taken in terms of those plans, how those can be compared over time in terms of what has worked well or what has not worked well. Again, I'm not doing this in a way of competition. I'm doing this in a way of learning from the experience by having somewhat 4 different unique approaches. So that would be my first high-level question.
So I'll go ahead and fill that, Mr. Cohen. One of the adjustments which will be made this year is that I will be pushing in with Dr. Smith and her team, who I also want to acknowledge that they're all on the line, hearing the same messages from the school-based folks. And I also want to give kudos to those 7 principals for their work. But part of our work is we're meeting monthly, and part of continuous improvement, and you heard a couple of the principals allude to it. What are some of those best practices? And as we're analyzing data and as we're looking at trends, when we see anomalies of where student outcomes are extremely high in certain areas, there'll be some questions around, well, what potentially is happening different there, which is attributing to those results, and then how do we duplicate that throughout all four schools on the K4 level. Another piece that we'll be looking at, you have horizontal articulation, but there's also something called vertical articulation, where as we're really identifying what some of those deficiencies are, is how do we backwardly map to our earlier grades to try to change the trajectory of those deficiencies as we move through the scope and sequence of curriculums, both horizontally, but also in the continuum as students matriculate K through 12. So we will be giving the board updates. Our weekly updates will start December 4th, where you guys will get snapshots of what the work looks like as we're moving through that continuous improvement process.
Great, and thank you, Dr. Scriven. Actually, you effectively answered my second question, which is about vertical and moving from one school to another. So I don't have to ask that question. So thank you very much for your response and also anticipating directly or indirectly my second question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I think Ms. Henry, your hand was up next.
Yes, I have a couple questions. What is the purpose of using Linkit for grades 1 and 2, and then CDT for 3 and 4?
Now, I'm going to have to defer to Dr. Smith as I continue to familiarize myself with the system. So, Dr. Smith, if you could give a little insight on why that's differentiated, that would greatly be appreciated, ma'am.
CDTs are offered in grades 3 through 12, just as the state assessments, PSSA, and Keystones are offered grade through 12.
Okay, but so what? Okay, so let me rephrase that question then. Like in terms of, so is it that Linkit is not available? Because I know those assessments are different. So I'm trying to understand, besides, is it just that that's from 3 to 12, so that's what we just give them?
Well, give me one moment. I'm going back to the slide where that was, so everyone can see it. So the reason why we use the CDTs, does everyone see the fourth, can everyone see that fourth bullet? So that lists the benefits of using the CDT. So the benefits include, they mirror state summative exams. So when students see PSSAs and Keystones, it does not appear as if it's the first time that they're seeing that format. So that's one of the benefits. The other thing is, and I forgot who brought it up, but the other thing is, because we're taking CDTs online and we're taking PSSA and Keystones online, it is also not the first time that the students actually engage with the actual platform. So by the time they get to the spring, this should be just like sitting for the CDTs again for our children.
Okay, that clarified that question for me. Thank you. There was another. I get my notes. Some questions were being answered as you all were going along, so I deleted them. What is the new? He answered that. Oh, so here is a question. Another question I have. What's the plan to? Because I know there were, and I believe it. Mr. Wallace was talking about and a few people. Not all students had gotten assessed. So, is there a plan to assess all students?
So at Elkins Park, all the students were assessed, but there's like a deadline for when we have to, so the data is cut off. So as soon as students were, and this to try to keep it confidential, as soon as they were available, for whatever reason, we assessed them right away. So okay. The problem is the students weren't available to take that test for extenuating circumstances.
Okay. All right. Perfect. This question may not be able to be answered tonight, but I want to put it out there because I do want us to come back to this at some point. And that is like really good information. This has been very thorough. And thank all of you for providing so much insight to us. In terms of contingency plans, has that been thought about, and has it been done? And when I talk about contingency plans, the best laid plans are great until something sort of breaks or goes wrong, right? One of the issues I know that's happening, for example, in the high school, and I think Mr. Metcalf, you may even be having some issues, is teacher absences. And so if that's happening consistently and in large numbers, which means students are not getting that consistent teaching from their teachers, how is that going to be addressed, or is there a plan to think about not only that, what happens if this happens, so that it's not we got to fight a fire or kids are not getting what they need, but it's a plan in place that we pull the plug, we pull the lever on this if this thing happens. Has that been done?
I'll go ahead and tackle that. So we are pulling all of our data right now as it relates to teacher attendance. We actually receive that daily. I was fortunate enough to have my first CEA meeting today. And one of the agenda items which they brought to the table, which I was pleased, was an opportunity for me and Dr. Smith to go over there and have some dialogue around some of the concerns or issues that they've identified at the high school level. Of course, Dr. Lahara and his administrative team will be a part of that conversation, but that's going to be our work. So is there a set contingency plan as of right now? No, there is not. Are we moving forward to making sure that we have a plan to address issues or concerns that will hopefully transfer into affording students that cohesive environment to meet with success? That's what we're going to start to sit at the table and collaboratively discuss.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. My last question, this does not have to be answered tonight at all. It is, could we be making ESSER funding available to address some of these needs or to support some of what teachers and the principals, what you all need for the students?
Well, I know everyone had an opportunity to submit how they would like to see ESSER funds used. I think as I start at the high school and backwardly map from there to the middle 5, 6, and down to K4, we'll have an opportunity to revisit how those funds are being allocated. I need to have a greater perspective on what the asks are, other than what's already been submitted, especially as we are looking at the school improvement plan. One critical area which we have to really calibrate is around the professional development. So we're identifying deficits based on the data. Subsequently, we have to work with our teachers to identify is there professional development that they need, which will better support them in addressing those deficit areas, especially those areas where we're seeing that there's trend data across years speaking to the same deficient standards.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Scriven. I have no other questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven and Ms. Henry. Sorry, there was someone at my front door. I apologize, which is kind of unusual this late at night, so I apologize for that. Ms. Haywood, I think that you're up next.
Thank you, Ms. Sloman. I wanted to also thank all of the principals for the presentation tonight. Dr. Smith, thank you very much for kind of teeing everything up and answering some fundamental questions. And for Mr. Pimental also for providing some perspective on kind of the review of this, more of a circular review of this to make sure that we are meeting our desired outcomes. Just a few questions. Dr. Scriven, this is kind of back to your vertical alignment observation. When I see the trend data as it relates to math, and that's kind of been consistent district-wide from K through high school, in terms of vertical alignment, have we looked at whether our math curriculum is vertically aligned?
I have a meeting with Dr. Smith tomorrow. Those are part of the conversations and discussions we will be having. And we are going to start having our cabinet meetings again, where the full team is sitting at the table, parallel with the meetings with the principal. So Mrs. Hayward, this is, I'm now into the work. So I'm on two parallel tracks right now, where I'm still trying to honor the entry plan and the need to make sure that I'm forming relationships and hearing the perspectives of our multiple stakeholder groups. But as I'm having one-on-ones, I'm also identifying that there's some standard operating procedures and just some structures that we're going to look at attacking right now as we are looking at the data. So please stand by. That work will be in progress, and I look forward to being able to give you some updates around the findings and our path forward with addressing what seems to be an obvious disconnect, doing a lot better in ELA versus math. And that's where we have to dig in and kind of do a root cause analysis on a central office level to figure out why that is.
Yeah, and I didn't expect an answer to that. It was more of an observation.
Yes, ma'am.
And assumed that you would be tackling that at some point, but it was just more of an observation. I really appreciate the depth of the data that was provided this evening. I know that it was not disaggregated, and while that would have probably lengthened the meeting, probably a couple of hours, it would be nice to see that disaggregated data, just so that we have a better perspective in terms of pieces that we need to tackle, systemically tackle. And I know while some of the improvement plans have focused on looking at some of that disaggregated data as it relates to performance of African American students and our special education students, but I think from at least one board member, I would like to see that data disaggregated as well, so we can really kind of see generally how all of our students are performing. And that's just one board member's request. As it relates to the priority plans, which I really do appreciate those school improvement plans, some of them have kind of reviewing data, second benchmark, sometimes a third benchmark, sometimes during the PSSA, when the PSSAs are taken. How are we looking at these school improvement plans to kind of evaluate all along whether we're really going to be meeting the desired outcomes? Because they're pretty lofty outcomes. And I really applaud us for having those lofty outcomes in mind. But along the way, are we evaluating those plans so that if we are kind of off course, we can recalibrate and get on a different path?
Well, you used the key word, recalibrate. I'm looking forward to really starting to have more fluid dialogue with all of our principals. You heard it mentioned this evening by a couple principals, and it could be all, I'm not sure yet, where they mentioned the 80%, looking at least 80% of their scholars being able to demonstrate mastery. So outside of benchmarks, there's formative assessments, or what some may call exit tickets, where students have opportunities to demonstrate their mastery of whatever those mastery objectives were and standards were for any given lesson. That's going to be some of the questions that I'm going to be asking around how are we doing that. But that's the perfect way, as we look at that cyclical continuous improvement approach of not just having to wait for a benchmark, but having real-time data. You heard mention of PLCs, You heard mention of common planning. There's a lot of instructional practices which are currently happening at schools, which will give them a snapshot of progress towards growth.
Thank you. And my last question relates to, I think what I've heard throughout all the presentations was the real concern about the social and emotional well-being of both our students and our staff. And so this is more of a loaded question, and more of an open-ended question. I guess as you are thinking about, those needs, it would be really helpful for the board to understand specifically what are the asks of the board as it relates to support in that area. If we know that that's a fundamental piece that we need to, get in order to really have our students feel safe, feel well as the staff and the principals, quite frankly, even in all the schools. So as you are looking at your plans, please think about what the ask would be to the board as it relates to the social and emotional component as well.
Yes, ma'am, will do, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood. I also, as one board member, support the request to have disaggregated data, and also, obviously, discussions around planning and priority planning, and to address some of those gaps, if you will, around that disaggregated data. So I agree with that. And I would also just include also in sort of Michelle, Principal Robinson alluded to this a little bit, but what are also some of the asks around kind of the academic support that the board might be looking at? Do our elementary schools need an assistant principal, or that's just one thing that I'm just pulling that out there because you had mentioned that, Ms. Robinson. But those and Dr. Clark is nodding her head. Yeah, okay. But those are the kinds of things that I as one board member as well, I'd be interested in knowing as well, sort of in terms of support. Or do we maybe need to move maybe I misheard some of the class size ratios sound pretty good at some of our elementary schools. So maybe we need to kind of reconfigure sort of some of those, and maybe we need to, have a teacher on assignment to do some work or something like that, to help support the principal. I don't know, but that's just sort of some thoughts I have in terms of how the board, also wondering how the board can support kind of academically as well.
Well, let me just respond to that. I would say that we could definitely gather that information. That would be a dialogue that could be held during executive session, because there's going to be a give and take if that were to even be entertained. So let me just be very transparent with that. So
appreciate that. Thank you, Dr.
Yes, okay.
All right, Mr. Schultz, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. And I just want to start by saying I am so deeply appreciative of this presentation. I appreciate the raw amount of time you spent presenting it, which must certainly reflect a fair amount of time preparing it. And it is all of the right, it's just all of the content that we as a board, as a system need. I'm also thankful that we all were able to watch you. I'm sure there's value in seeing your peers present this stuff, and to the point that Mr. Cohen raised of lessons learned from one another. So thank you all who had a part in getting us to this presentation. I don't have a huge number of questions. Many have been answered and asked. I wanted to give a +1 to as a third board member, I suppose, around the disaggregated data. And for me, it's not that I would ask for there to be another presentation, but if in a board update or something like that, just to have that available if it's achievable.
So Dan, so you guys don't have to continue to ask, we will make sure that we put together a disaggregated report.
Sounds good. But in terms of other future updates, what is the cadence? What's an appropriate cadence? Because, there is part of that evaluation. I'm very interested in understanding what progress we're making, not from a being able to provide any commentary or insight, because you all are doing your jobs, but just being aware of what progress we are or are not making. Is there a cadence that we might be able to get board update level updates on some of these numbers as we get more benchmark data throughout the year?
Yeah. So I believe, and Dr. Smith can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there are 2 more benchmark opportunities. I think those are the most, I'll use the word salient because it's been put out there, data points as it relates to really progress monitoring and being able to see our growth as we're moving through the school year. So without a doubt, there could be 2 more viable options to get some solid data updates in terms of how we're progressing.
Thank you.
Can I add another thing to that, Dr. Scriven?
Of course.
And I don't know if you had a chance to review it because I've shared hundreds of things with you in such a short amount of time, but we are going to relaunch the data dashboard that everyone had access to. It's its own standalone website, for lack of a better term, that's manned by my office. And so when you and I meet tomorrow, you can look at the data dashboard and we can share that link, reshare that link with the board. And that'll be where all of their data requests are housed. And we've done that. We've done that in the past. It would just be a matter of us updating with the most recent data that we just received. And it'll be live and you can look at the data, at your leisure, and you don't have to wait for weekly updates or for a presentation. Is there.
So what we can do, Dr. Smith, when we review, we will frame what that looks like for the board and let them have at it. I think that's outstanding. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. And my last follow-up question or request, I suppose, is around that root cause analysis. Dr. Scriven, as you were talking about the root cause analysis for the math versus ELA, I scrubbed away a question I was going to ask, but I would love to. I'm so curious as to what, because it's across the board, that difference, and I would love to better understand what lessons we can learn. Right, the positive angle is what are we doing so right in the English language arts side. So
potentially we could put that as a future agenda item, as a standalone item, and just hone in on that math component.
Thank you. My only question is around parents and teachers and their role in this. Teachers, I feel, is obvious, but in terms of the goals and the building level goals, are teachers going to be? How are teachers seeing themselves in those goals? Or at a classroom level, will they be expected to say a 10% increase or a certain number of students? And then the second part of that question is, if our parents, and it might not be appropriate because I understand, I know you don't, what is said or not said to a parent about an individual student is an art space that I have no insight into. But how would a parent be involved in helping accomplish these goals, or helping their student move from basic to advanced, or from advanced to proficient? Is that a dialogue?
Yeah, I'll see if there's any principals that are on the line that want to speak to that. I think they're in the trenches and closest to the work. So do we have anyone willing to share how you're currently facilitating that work?
I can just share briefly. At Glenside, the school performance measures that teachers need to create are aligned with the school performance goals. So looking at those goals, they then, extrapolated from their particular goals around for their grade level and for their classrooms. And then as far as parents, utilizing in my schools, the pause group, or AKA PTO, to share this plan with them as well, so that they can understand the really, concrete ways that we're supporting students and think about the ways that they can partner with us. And I heard a lot of that, again, as I sat in on a variety of parent-teacher conferences. I heard a lot of, things that the parents were doing. And when you look at the multi-tiered system of support, that level 1 action plan, which is sort of the all student level, tier 1 that Dr. Smith mentioned, in that level, when teachers are looking at, let's say there's a specific area that there's a student needs to work on, they then identify what interventions they're going to utilize to work on it and who's going to help. And oftentimes at that level 1 level, there's a role for parents to do, some things that they could do at home. So that conversation is ongoing. And just to kind of circle back to Ms. Haywood's question about how do we check along the way, again, that MTSS system is where we check along the way. We have really specific dates. We'll date, today, if that action plan was created, then we note in a spreadsheet 4 weeks from now, we're going to check in and see how things are going. And if things are going well, we maintain. If things are not going well, we recalibrate, we meet, we call the parent in, we come up with a new plan, a new set of interventions. Who are the experts in the building that can help with that? That may be OT, it may be PT. We may need to check in with the school psychologist, but we really meet every other week to just make sure that we're following along with that plan.
Thank you, Principal Robinson. Any other principals want to chime in? I mean, that's a great question, and that was a great response.
So for the benchmark, one of the cool things that we noticed is that the benchmark will tell them just how close they are to proficient, or just how far along they are in proficient, or just how far they're in advance. So in our last team meeting, what we did is we shared with the teachers just to report with the parents, so the parents know the progress that they're making as well. Because as another principal said in this meeting, the big partnership between parents and teachers is going to take us all to get this work done. So now parents know the data, know how far they are, and just how far they are to being proficient or advanced or on task to perform well in ELA and math.
Thank you, Principal Wallace, as well. So should we keep going, Mr. Schultz, or are you okay with those responses?
Anyone that want that was both of those answers were incredibly helpful. Anyone that wants to say anything else, of course, but I am thank you. That's helpful.
Any other principals? One last response from anyone?
I would echo this year at Myers, and I'm sure this is common practice across all schools, we have tried to really cultivate a relationship with our parent-teacher organization where we align our goals. Early, as I stated early in my tenure, we have grown to develop an alignment of our missions and developing a common language as our PTO, where they, as Ms. Robinson stated, are fully aware of what our initiatives are, consistent meetings with PTO leadership as it relates to what are our goals, developing a common language. What does this mean? What do these terms mean? How can we be helpful as a PTO as it relates to the school's individual mission, the school's needs, the needs that present themselves now that are different than in previous years. So that transparency and that level of authentic conversation with PTO leadership, and then working with the PTO as it relates to soliciting the input of other parents, making sure that parents are aware that they have a platform and that they have a vehicle to express their concerns. They don't feel comfortable, or they have a need, or just want some more information as relates to a specific topic that is of concern to them. So that PTO collaboration piece has been something that we've been really trying to emphasize at Myers as it relates to communicating our goals, our data, our areas of need, and our areas of emphasis for growth as we've started this school year.
Thank you, Principal Lido, as well. Thank you all. I think that's a testament to how in tune our principals are to the needs of the community. Look, this is, again, a snapshot. We recognize, and I clearly articulate and acknowledge right now that we still have a lot of work to do. That's evident in the data, but we have a good baseline, which shows where we currently are. And the work now is mapping out our action to address those targeted needs. So I'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Lohman.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. Ms. Haywood, did I see your hand up, or did that your question got right? Okay. And then I just want to put it out there to the hardy few attendees that we have remaining from the community. If anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand and we can unmute you. I don't see any raised hands. Give it one more second, but I don't see anything. I just also wanted, just as the chair of the meeting, thank everyone again for all of this information and thought that has gone into this presentation and time. And I think this is just incredibly important, so that we're all on the same page, so we know sort of where we're headed, if you will. So I appreciate all of that. With everyone's time so with that all being said, if there are no further questions from board members and I don't see anything from the community, I am going to ask for a motion to adjourn, but just say that the next Educational Affairs Committee meeting will be on December 21st at 7 p.m. via Zoom. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Ms. Lohman,
Oh,
before we adjourn, I would just be remiss if I did not acknowledge Dr. Smith, her team, and our principals. I mean, they really did an outstanding job tonight. It's 10:24, and I hope you all have a greater understanding of just the work where we are currently and where we're aspiring to be. So I did not want to miss that opportunity. It's his only day going into day 18, but definitely appreciate all their efforts and their leadership. So Mr. Cohen or anybody, you please feel free to move the motion.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Second?
Henry.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Thank you, everyone. So I guess I have to say, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy
Happy holiday, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe, everybody. Have a great holiday. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.